So when it comes to American Revolution, there are two very important questions, and in fact these two questions are very important even for your UPSC preparation also, because the moment it comes to American Revolution, popularly we know it as American Revolution, right? Because the moment you say American Revolution, I think majority of us always use the term American Revolution. Very less number of people use the term like American War of Independence. So it's popular in the world history with the name of American Revolution. But then this question is there, that whether it was revolution, American Revolution was really revolutionary, or it was non-revolutionary in nature. Because if it is merely a war of independence, in that case it is non-revolutionary in nature. But if it was beyond that, if it was something more than that, in that case we must call it the American Revolution, or we should know it as revolution. So if we need to understand the American Revolution, in that case we have to understand it with multiple perspectives. And in fact we should understand the American Revolution with respect to basically the various reasons which were lying behind the American Revolution, and that's how we'll be able to do the right justice with this particular topic, that whether it was really revolutionary or not, right? So when it comes to American Revolution, I would like to start with the kind of basic things, okay? And then only we'll be able to understand whether it was like, how come the American Revolution was basically taking a shape. So if like you remember the things that we have discussed earlier, so as per that, like, we have already talked about, like, the situation which was present in America. So basically if you'll see America, in that case you all will be able to notice one thing, and what exactly was this is basically the 13 colonies, right? Fine. So as I have already discussed that when it comes to the American situation, exactly before the American Revolution, right? Let me tell you a few things. So these are basically 13 colonies. The names are written here. So if you'll see the 13 colonies in the whole map of America, in that case you'll find only this was the patch which was colonized by Britain. And in fact it is not true that the land remains like only this. Rather we can see that something which was happening, that's known as westward expansion, and in fact a tendency of moving towards this direction that can be definitely noticed, that they wanted to come to this part. And I have already told you that if you go to this down south, in that case some other countries were present, such as Spain is there, right? And down to that, like, you will find the Portugal is there. That's how you'll find some of the countries are there in this side. But then you will find that France, which is present somewhere in this particular region. Now France was also very much interested to come to this side, which is somehow a kind of very fertile land of America. On the other hand, you can talk about the willingness of France even to penetrate into this area also. So basically a tendency can be noticed of France where like they wanted to come to this side. On the other hand, if we talk about the British Americans, they wanted to come to this side. So if you'll talk about precisely the 13 colonies, the situation is like this. So you can see all these 13 colonies were there, and I have already told you that when it comes to this part, this particular part, that's precisely known as New England. This is known as the middle colony. Specifically Virginia was falling in the category of New Virginia and Maryland, and then these three were known as what? The southern colonies. In fact, if we'll talk about the economy, in that case this is known for the plantation economy. These are also involved in agriculture, but then when it comes to these colonies, they were mainly involved in the trade and commerce, and some manufacturing units were there, but they were involved in very sort of minor sort of manufacturing stuff. They were not manufacturing sort of very great amount of things as such. So that is the condition of USA immediately before this revolution. But then there were a couple of important incidents which have taken place, and after that you'll find that the situations have started changing. We have already discussed about the political situation which is there. So as per this political situation, the 13 colonies were precisely believed to be the 13 colonies, or the, let's say, colonies of Britain. And in fact they wanted simply, like Britain wanted to exercise all sort of powers in those colonies what they had been enjoying at the other parts of world. On the other hand, the kind of mindset these people were having, that was slightly different. Instead of understanding themselves as colonized, or let's say like these regions as colony of Britain, they always believe that they are very much part of Britain. So I hope you all understand that when you talk about any particular region as part of Britain, and when you talk about them as colony, so there is a huge difference, and there is a basically constitutional difference between these two. Because जब आप किसी part को colony कहते हैं, इसका मतलब there is only one objective which is like lying here, and that is all about exploitation. On the other hand, if we'll talk about basically the part of it, so of course the idea of exploitation is not there. So you can understand that since beginning there was some sort of different stand, constitutional stands were there from both the sides, and what constitutional institutions were prevailing. So in every state you can find that some representative bodies were there. The representative bodies were being formed from the people like living here only, but the moment it comes to the governor, they were appointed by the British Crown and they were here. But this is also we have made it like this is also we have made very clear that when it comes to governors, the governors were mainly though representative of Crown, but still since they were getting the salary from these colonies, that's the first thing. And the second thing, ultimately they needed to survive here, and that's why they were more working in accordance with the local people, or let's say the representative body here, rather than rather than as per the instructions what he had been or they had been receiving from the British Crown. That is the whole situation which is there. But then this situation does not remain same, and in fact gradually you find changes. And in fact the one movement which is very responsible for like this, right, that is the 1763, and that 1763 a war against the Indians and the Red Indians and the French people, and to some extent Spain was also playing a very important role. So this war is considered to be a very important event. Why? Because immediately after the war you find the situation got changed drastically. So earlier also some sort of exploitation was there. Exploitation, I must say, in terms of economic exploitation. And what sort of economic exploitation was there? That we can understand through the Molasses Act, and the second one was Navigation Act. So most important for us is undoubtedly the Navigation Act, and the second one is the Molasses Act. So this is how the situation was there. But here I must tell you that whatever the situation was there with respect to specifically the economic situation, right, or the economic provisions, the Americans or the British Americans were also quite okay with this, and they had never objected against this. Now, why were they very okay with this? Because they always believed that their economy is going well, and in fact they never had any grievance as such, and that's why before 1763 you won't find that they had been responding against this. So Navigation Act was undoubtedly there before 1763, and Navigation Act of course continued even after 1763, but then the problems have started appearing only after 1763, not before 1763. That's the most important thing we have to understand. But after 1763, now some other problems have started started appearing, and among the other problems, basically we can talk about certain things which were done by the British government, and these things were not acceptable to the British Americans, right? So first, or one by one we can discuss about these. So first thing I can talk about here is about the levying of various new kind of taxes, right? So among them, the most important is the Navigation Act. So Navigation Act was earlier there, but Navigation Act is right now also Navigation Act is there, but then the way the British state was changing its policy or its attitude towards Britain, towards America, that should be understood. So basically the person who was ruler of ruler of Britain, called as George III. Now George III had so many problems, and George III wanted to change this change this attitude of Britain towards America. The reason behind it, that when it comes to the war that I had been discussing earlier, after this war you'll find that Britain wanted to recover its money what they have invested. Unfortunately, the American colonies never had huge amount of army which could have really protected America. So the moment it comes to the protection of 13 colonies, Britain was taking the responsibility of it. During the war also, Britain did everything. So after the war, Britain wanted to recover this money. Now how to recover this money? So there are several mechanisms which are there. But here I should talk about one more person who has played very important role, and who is coming to power in, I guess, 1764, called as Granville. Okay. Granville was the new prime minister, and Granville was brought up with such sort of mindset where he had been hating the Americans. I do not know that what are the things, but that in his statements or in his writings, it's very clear that that person has always been hating the Americans, and that's how the moment it comes to that making decisions with respect to America, so he was always known for taking the harsh policies for it, right? So Granville has gone for several harsh policies, and as a result of that you can say that now the situation between the between the Americans and the British Americans became somehow conflicting. So one by one let's discuss about the changes which are there in the policies. So Granville must be Granville must be considered to be responsible for first for implementing these policies, and among them the first thing I'll tell you, the Navigation Act. Okay. So the Navigation Act was reframed again and again, and at least under the leadership of Granville, we'll find that there are two more revisions which were done in the Navigation Act, and as per this Navigation Act, now it was categorically said, or they simply said ki whatsoever provisions were there in the Navigation Act, now it should be implemented more strictly. Now this is a very important important point that you should keep in mind, that Navigation Act was there earlier as well, right? But the Navigation Act was not being followed in a very strict way. That is a very important thing to be understood. It was never followed by them very strictly. So if there was certain instances of violation was there of the Navigation Act, so it was known to the British officials, but they had been ignoring it. And in fact, like when I had been taking the last class, I did tell you very categorically that smuggling was a very common phenomenon in America. And in fact, all those things what the Americans could have accessed easily or on a cheaper rate, they were quite okay with that, and they had been doing it. And in fact, the British authorities were very much aware of this, but even though they were not intervening in this. Sugar is one, like sugar or let's say molasses can be said as one of the most important object that was brought from the Caribbean islands through the smuggling, and the British authorities were quite okay with this, because somehow whatsoever molasses they have produced in the Caribbean islands, they were selling it on the rate in which they wanted to sell it, and that's why they were quite okay with this. But as I told you that Grenville now never wanted to practice them or continue the practices of the previous thing, and that's how he is sending some more custom officers, and in fact he appointed good number of people, specifically the custom officers, and then some new ships were also hired, and they had been categorically asked to stop these kind of practices, right? So the moment these kind of restrictions were put over them, now it had started creating the problems. ठीक है, अब अमेरिकन्स को प्रॉब्लम हो रही कि अभी तक उनकी लाइफ जो है चलती थी बिना किसी ऐसे रोक टोक के, अब उनकी लाइफ में बहुत सारे जो है रिस्ट्रिक्शंस उन्होंने लगाने शुरू कर दिए. दैट इज वन इंपॉर्टेंट डिसीजन दैट हैड बीन पुटिंग इम्पैक्ट ओवर द ब्रिटिश अमेरिकन. Now moving to the second thing. Now the second thing is again very important, and you have to understand it very carefully. The way I was telling you about the expansion towards the west. So it was a continuous process which goes in America, because I have already shown the last picture, and in this particular picture you have seen that the colonies are like this, but then over the period, and in fact within a century you'll find that America becomes the whole America, which was just 13 colonies till the American War of Independence. So basically it's a continuous process that you can notice. And under this process also some conflict between Britain and America had started happening. Now what is the conflict between these two? So the moment it comes to the land, what kind of utility should be there of this land? What sort of land it is? Fertile land, agricultural land. So when it is agricultural land, so basically the people, those were there in this part, specifically in the colonies like Georgia, South Carolina and North Carolina. So since they were farmers, as I have already told you that it was the agriculturist economy. So that's the reason, because of what they were expecting this from the Britain, that this part should be given to them. And in fact the way they had got the land, earlier without paying any huge amount of money. So they were expecting the same sort of thing from the British government कि उनको औने पौने दाम पे उनको दे दिया जाए ताकि वो अपना उस लैंड को सेटल कर सके. And in fact the process of this had even started happening, and these people started migrating to these parts, and they were trying to settle this land, right? But over the period it has been realized, right? Over the period it has been realized by the British government that since France is present here, and what sort of relationship was there between France and Britain, that I don't need to tell you. You know that they had been continuously fighting. France was a regular enemy of Britain, and that's why they were very scared of. That's the first thing. The second thing, that they had severe doubt that without the resources, it won't be that much possible for the people who are present here to settle this land, because the French people would be having the regular intervention. That's the second thing. And that's how suddenly this decision was made by the Grenville government, or Grenville government, that they are not going to hand over this land to the British Americans. Rather, they decided to take this land or the control of this land by their own. And in fact, they started either allotting like some of the other companies, and they took the responsibility of settle this land. This is another development which is happening, which was very disappointing for the people living in America, right? And that brought a different situation here, because now the Red Indians living in this part, they are somehow provoked by the French colonizers, and they were provoked in such a way that a very popular revolt is taking place, and the revolt which was led by the person called as Pontiac. ठीक है, Pontiac एक जो है रेड इंडियन लीडर है जिसने क्या किया, रिवोल्ट किया. और जाहिर सी बात है कि he is simply a red Indian leader. Of course it's a primitive community, but then by that time they were not any more primitive. Why? Because they were getting the support from the French people, and sometimes even the French army were also giving them support, though they were limited such acts. But yes, of course these people were provided with the arms and ammunition, and then then like you'll find that there were very popular revolt took place, and I must tell you that Pontiac is a very, very powerful, like or his movement was a very powerful movement that has also taken place. After this, like particular movement, I think the British government got more clarity that what has to be done to the land which had been annexed, like on the western side. That was another important issue of the conflict between Britain and British Americans, right? So that is the second thing, right? Moving to the third thing. Now some more acts were brought, and in fact through these acts, now British government had been genuinely trying to collect some money from the Americans, right? Among these acts, one can be noticed, like that's called as which one? Stamp Act. चलो Stamp Act के बारे में बात कर लेते हैं, ठीक है? So let's talk about the Stamp Act. So there was another important act. And what was this act? Now, as per this particular Stamp Act, I have already told you that the British government had just one tendency or one objective. They had to retrieve money. They have to collect money from American colonies as much as possible, by them. And this is the reason because of what they had started doing this. So what is this Stamp Act? As per that, like all the legal transactions, right, or all the legal agreements had to be done on a stamp paper. ठीक है? I hope you all have seen the stamp paper. ठीक है? आज हम जो भी अग्रीमेंट करते हैं, हम रेंट एग्रीमेंट भी बनाते हैं, तो किस पे होता है? स्टैम्प पेपर पे बनता है. पहले के टाइम पे स्टैम्प पेपर का सिस्टम अमेरिका में इतना पॉपुलर नहीं था. सो नाउ द स्टैम्प पेपर्स, इन फैक्ट ऑल द कोर्ट पेपर्स एंड अदर पेपर्स वर कंपल्सरी नीडेड टू बी स्टैम्प पेपर. And now the stamp papers were basically issued by British government. So ideally speaking, all the money which is collected through the stamp paper, or which are collected basically, I must say, by selling the stamp papers, right? So that money must be going to British government. So that was another act which was brought, and it was a kind of it was a very sudden change which is coming, and in fact the Americans were not ready for this act. So this is the reason. In fact, some solution had to be some solution was provided, because another important leader of America, that's called as Benjamin Franklin. Now Benjamin Franklin came up with a suggestion, and in fact somehow he tried to manage the situation in this way, that he asked two of the Americans only to get this right of selling the stamp paper. So that's how the good margin of the profit could have been there in America only, but then it did not work. Why did not it work? It's not very tough to understand, because you all understand that ultimately the British government wanted to make some money. That's it. That was the idea they had. So that's how we can say this idea has also failed. The another act which is again very important, that's called as Quartering Act, right? The significance of Quartering Act is there much. Now what is this Quartering Act? The way Pontiac is rebelling, that's one thing. France was very aggressive towards America, second thing. And in fact further possibilities were there that the France could invade the lands in America, or let's say the 13 colonies, and that's how now, in order to protect their western land, in order to keep the French threat away, that's the reason because of what Britain is appointing, or Britain is sending good number of army to this part, right? So when they are sending good number of army to this part, so now there's a new there was a new expenditure to bear the there was a new sort of challenge to bear the expenditure of the soldiers who were placed in America. अब उनको कैसे मैनेज करें, तो उन्होंने एक प्रोविजन बनाया और एक एक्ट बनाया जिसको हम कहते हैं क्वार्टरिंग एक्ट. क्वार्टर से बना है क्वार्टरिंग एक्ट. Now what is this Quartering Act? Every family, those who are posted, those who are living specifically in this side, the border side, they had been categorically asked to provide shelter, right? Then food, and then fuel. These are certain things which what they had been asked categorically to provide every household, and that was, I hope you can understand that that was a clear-cut violation of the individual freedom. आपके घर में जबरदस्ती 3 गेस्ट बिठा दिए गए या 2 गेस्ट बिठा दिए गए और आपसे कहा कि आपको सारा खर्चा इनका उठाना है. So that was beyond the tolerance of the Americans. So this Quartering Act was also very much provoking to the Americans, right? Okay, apart from this, there was one more act that's called as Townshend Act. Okay, Townshend Act. Townshend was basically one minister in Britain, and Townshend has come up with another provision, and as per that provision, they have been categorically asked the British Americans to pay taxes on some other commodities which were free from any kind of tax earlier, but now they had been categorically asked to collect the right tax from them. Okay, so this is like another act, and of course it was not like acceptable to the British American. That was another important issue that could be discussed. Okay, moving next, there was another act that's called a Sugar Act. Okay, now when it comes to the Sugar Act, like try to understand it categorically because it's a bit complicated. Why is bit complicated? Sugar was one commodity which was imported from which part? The Caribbean islands. ठीक है, तो Caribbean islands से जो sugar import करते थे, मैंने उसका alternative तरीका भी बताया है कि स्मगलिंग के थ्रू आती थी. ठीक है, तो स्मगलिंग के थ्रू जब ये आती है तो उनके लिए ज़्यादा सस्ता पड़ता है. लेकिन इन्होंने क्या किया, लाइक इन्होंने बहुत स्मार्टली किया कि शुगर एक्ट में उन लोगों ने जो पहले से लेवीड टैक्स था उसको कम कर दिया उन लोगों ने, इनफैक्ट आधा कर दिया. पहले पर गैलन पे 6 पेंसेस के टैक्स लगते थे, अब उन्होंने क्या किया, पर गैलन पे उन्होंने 3 पेंसेस के टैक्स कर दिए. और जब उन्होंने 3 पेंसेस के टैक्स कर दिए तो आइडियली वो अमेरिकन के लिए अच्छा है या खराब है? अच्छा है. But still the Americans were not very happy with this. Why? Because they believed that it was something which is actually freely available to them, right? They could get it easily from the Caribbean islands. Like this, it is still being taxed, or it is still taxable. That was the whole idea. So basically, all these acts were passed, and in fact, they were not ready, or they were not very much okay with these various acts which were passed. And these acts could be noticed between 1774 to 1770. Right? So when all these acts were being passed, so somehow a kind of negative feeling started spreading among the Americans, and among them the person who has been providing the maximum leadership was undoubtedly the person. Benjamin Franklin has played very important role, but Samuel Adams was the person, right? He was from Virginia, and in fact this person has played the most significant role. Why? Because this person had started motivating not only the people in his own land, but even the people from the other colonies. He started writing letters to the other colonies, or like the colonies that we have already discussed, that what are the colonies, and that's how a kind of tendency was noticed. And there was one more person, unfortunately I'm not having the picture of that, called as James Otis. ठीक है, उसका नहीं है शायद. ठीक है, तो James Otis दूसरा है. ठीक है, वो थॉमस पेन है, वो तो राइटर है यार, ये रेवोल्यूशनरी है जिसकी बात मैं कर रहा हूँ. बहुत है, बट जेम्स ओटिस जो है वो एक उसको एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पर्सन है. ठीक है, ओके. When these acts were implemented, and after that, the way I am telling you that there was so much opposition had started, and among these opposition there is one person who has played very important role, is called as Patrick Henry. ठीक है, पेट्रिक हेनरी को कई बार हम जहाँ फादर ऑफ अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन भी कहते हैं. क्यों कहते हैं पेट्रिक हेनरी को हम फादर ऑफ अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन? बिकॉज ही वाज द पर्सन, इज कंप्लीट नेम वाज पेट्रिक हेनरी बर्गीज. ठीक है, व्हेन it comes to the opposition, right? So he was the first person, he was from Virginia, right? And he was the first person who took this stand कि when it comes to levying any sort of tax over the Americans, right? So only the representative bodies of the various colonies does have the right, or do have the right to levy all these taxes. So the British government does not have any right to levy all these taxes, only the representative bodies could do it. That was the stand he had, and I hope you can understand that this person was coming up with such an idea which could have provoked all the people. Because the moment you talk about democracy, now whether you are literally understanding the ideas of democracy or not, that's also very important. But the moment it comes to the Patrick Henry, somehow he came up with this idea where he talked about the implementing the the real democratic ideas, and that's how he outrightly refused. और कहते कि जब एक बार उसने मना किया तो ऐसे voices बाकी colonies से भी आने लगे. So that was something which was which was very important, and then it was further led by Samuel Adams and James Otis, the two persons that I have been taking the name of it, and these two persons are mostly known for opposing the Stamp Act, right? So after the great opposition of this, I must tell you that some positive measures were ultimately taken, and in fact after this, you'll find that some of the revolts or some of the rebellions took place in different places, such as New England is there, Pennsylvania is there. ठीक है, न्यूयॉर्क में भी होता है. तो कुछ ऐसे revolt शुरू हो गए, and that's how the British government had to go for some reactionary policies, or let's say some such measures through which the American people could be consoled. उनको उन्होंने कोशिश की इस तरीके से कि ताकि ये लोग वापस जो है अपने पैटर्न पे आ जाए, ठीक है, और like you know they should start following those instructions which were coming from the British Parliament. But then by that time I must say that something has happened which was not acceptable to Americans, and that's the voice of resistance continued from here. Now when it comes to the voice of resistance, I must tell you that here there are some people, they wanted to exploit this situation, and that's how they were continuously against the, like you know, continuously against the voice of, like the voice of, I must say, the voice of America, voice of Britain, and in fact they have started provoking the Americans against the British. I am not saying that all the Americans were very much influenced by him or influenced by these leaders, but then yet, like you know, they were in a condition to somehow provoke it. Now here there are 2-3 things, like you know, or important incidents you should know, and among these 2 incidents, like I must say, 1769-70, like this is the year which is very important. Understand this year very carefully, because 1769-70, these are those 2 years in which we'll find that somehow the Americans were more against the policies, the various policies of Britain, and that's how a common opposition or resistance of the British policies could be noticed in America, and that's how a mass level protest, specifically that idea of boycotting the British products was there, 1769-70. And when it comes to the boycotting products, British products, so mainly the class which was participating in this was the upper class or the elite class of, you know, America. So that primarily included which class? The traders and the merchants. They did it. And when it took place, like immediately after that, it was giving a kind of great economic setback or financial setback to the British merchants and traders, and that's how in opposition of this had started, like in Britain also. In Britain also, the government like was being convinced by all those traders and merchants who are having their business with America that don't do anything as such, that they are going to lose all the trade and all the, like you know, basically trading activities with Britain, with America. Why? Because the prosperity of America to a greater extent was reason for the prosperity of Britain also. Yes or no? You all know that there were so many things being supplied from America only, and if these things would not be supplied to them, in that case there must be a great amount of problem. And among these at least 2 things which are very important. There's one is cotton. So whole British industry was ultimately relying upon the cotton being supplied from America. And I must tell you, and honestly I should admit, that majority of the cotton, raw cotton, was ultimately brought from America, not from India. And whenever there is some, like you know, some disturbance from this, like you know, in this supply of cotton from America to Britain, we'll find that suddenly the demand for the Indian cotton was increasing. That was a phenomena that could be noticed. Okay? So basically, as you can understand, if the British industries were altogether relying on the cotton production of America, so in that case you can understand the dependency. Okay? At the same time, I must tell you about tobacco also, and the way I did tell you that tobacco is very much commercialized, and in fact it is not only present in the European countries, it is like you know, even going to the other parts of world, and that's why it was another major source of income. The third thing I can tell you about the sugar, there were 6 important like British merchants, they had invested in the Caribbean islands, and in fact majority of their profit was coming after selling this sugar in the in America, and that's how they were also very much relying on this. So that's how we can find several such equations on the basis of what we can say, ultimately the profit of many merchants, and in fact the capitalists also, those who were there in Britain, like their profit was very much relying on their relationship with America, and that's how certain pressure could be noticed on what British government, and that's how British government had to go on the back foot, right? So at one hand there was a pressure on the British government, on the other hand when the merchant class or the elite class or the trading class in America went for this boycott of the foreign products. So I hope you can understand that there was no industry existing in America by that time, and in fact some minor industries were there, such as fur industry, we can talk about hat industry, हम इसकी बात कर सकते हैं. तो बहुत छोटे-छोटे कुछ industries है जो काम करते हैं, तो of course America also could not survive, and that's so this boycott could not continue for a longer period of time, और वो boycott जो है थोड़ा-थोड़ा करके जो है वो फिर खत्म हो जाता है, ठीक है, और 1 साल के अंदर वो boycott खत्म खत्म हो जाता है, एंड देन दिस लाइक सिचुएशन वाज वेरी मच चेंज. बट देन with the period between 1770 to 1770 to 1773, these are the periods for at least these two persons that I had been telling you. 3% in fact I must say कि एक तो पैट्रिक हेनरी है, दूसरा जो है जेम्स ओटिस है, और तीसरा सैमुअल एडम्स है. ठीक है, सैमुअल एडम्स को जो है ही इज़ लाइक नॉन फॉर सम ऑफ हिज टैलेंट्स. बेसिकली सैमुअल एडम्स को कहते हैं कि लोगों को कन्विंस करने की पावर उसके अंदर बहुत ज़बरदस्त थी, और उसने जो है धीरे धीरे करके एक जो है वो बनाना शुरू किया, एक कंसेंसस अमेरिका में बनाना शुरू किया. एंड दैट्स हाउ वी कैन फाइंड दैट येस देयर वर गुड नंबर ऑफ पीपल वर ग्रेजुअली गेटिंग convinced with this idea of freedom, or let's say at least not even freedom, so in that case the proper status of the 13 colonies as part of Britain. तो वो उस कंसेंसस को बनाने के लिए वो लोग चाहते हैं, और धीरे धीरे वो कंसेंसस बन रहा है. ठीक है, और फाइनली इन दिस सिचुएशन इन 1773 एंड अनदर लाइक मेजर इंसिडेंट हैज टेकन प्लेस, दैट्स नॉन एज कॉल्ड एज बोस्टन टी पार्टी. Now this is the port of Boston, as you can see here that this is the port of Boston. This particular port is very popular. अच्छा, बोस्टन में पहले भी 1770 में भी एक इंसिडेंट हो चुका था, जहाँ पे थोड़ी झड़प हुई थी किसके बीच में, ऐसे ही रेवोल्यूशनरीज के बीच में और ब्रिटिश सिपाहियों के बीच में. मैंने क्या कहा, कस्टम के अभी रीस्ट्रक्चर्ड है जो कस्टम उनका डिपार्टमेंट है, और उसकी वजह से यहाँ पे इस पूरे पार्ट में आप देखेंगे कि जो है ब्रिटिश लाइक द ब्रिटिश शिप्स आर वेरी एक्टिव और द कस्टम ऑफिसर्स आर वेरी एक्टिव. सो ऑन वन ओकेजन ऑलरेडी देयर वाज अ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट बिटवीन दीज टू, और वो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट भी थोड़ा मामला बिगड़ गया था. उसमें कॉन्फ्लिक्ट में ऐसे बर्फ के गोले से एक दूसरे से मारामारी कर रहे थे, बट जो है मतलब जो वो थे क्या कहते हैं, जो अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशनरीज थे, वो लड़के थे, कुछ यंग लड़के थे. ठीक है, उसने उधर सिपाही खड़े थे, एक सिपाही क्या वो था गार्ड था, उस गार्ड को बर्फ़ के गोले बना बना के उसको मार रहे थे. ठीक है, वो गार्ड थोड़ी देर में इरिटेट हो गया, उसने उसको बाकी सोल्जर्स को बुला लिया, सोल्जर्स ने गुस्से में फायर कर दिया और उसमें 5 लोग मर गए. ठीक है, वो जो 5 लोग मर गए उसके जवाब में काफ़ी हंगामा हुआ था यूएसए में, अमेरिका में, और सैमुअल एडम्स को तो ऐसे मौक़ों की तलाश रहती थी. ही वॉज ऑलवेज यूजिंग दीज काइंड ऑफ इंस्टेंसेस फॉर मोटिवेटिंग पीपल. बट व्हाट हैपेंड इन 1773, दैट इज़ द मोस्ट रिमार्केबल थिंग फॉर अस. नाउ व्हाट इज़ हैपनिंग इन 1773? In 1773, now we'll find again this port came into limelight, and what happened in this port, there was some supply of what? Tea from India. So what is this whole issue? Actually, there was some surplus tea with East India Company, and that was the year, you remember, 1773. Some surplus tea was there. And when this surplus tea was not being sold anywhere, and I hope you remember that majority of the tea plantation was under the control of the Britishers, not the Indians. तो अगर वो चाय नहीं बिकती तो फिर नुकसान कैसा था, कंपनी का नुकसान था. ठीक है, तो इसकी वजह से, और कंपनी आपको पता है कि ब्रिटिश सरकार भी नहीं चाहते थे कि कंपनी का नुकसान हो, तो उसकी वजह से उन्होंने क्या किया, उन्होंने एक जो है चेंज किया, and they asked the company, British East India Company, to supply their tea here, Boston में. बोला अमेरिका भेज दो. Frankly speaking, in fact, they have reduced the import duty on tea, and it was sent to America. What would be the impact of this? Positive impact. क्या positive impact होता? अमेरिका में चाय सस्ती हो जाती. ठीक है, but look at the problem. ठीक है, look at the revolutionary ideas. Ideally speaking, there was a material benefit of it, or there was a monetary benefit. The tea must have become very cheaper in America because the tax was there, and in fact, like the tax was again levied on this tea on the half rate. Why? Just to consume the tea which was coming from East India Company. But then, like the Americans were not okay with this. Why? Because they believed that if you're in your own interest, you can manipulate, you can change the Navigation Act. Why not? Why can't you do it in the interest of Americans? So it was more ideological rather than प्रैक्टिकल. ठीक है, उनको लगा कि आप अपने नेविगेशन एक्ट में अपने मतलब के हिसाब से चेंज कर सकते हैं, तो जब हम आपसे कहते हैं कि नेविगेशन एक्ट में थोड़े चेंज लेके आओ, तो आप क्यों नहीं लेके आ रहे हैं? एंड दैट्स व्हाई दे रिफ्यूज टू लाइक अनलोड दिस टी. एंड देन फाइनली वन डे व्हाट हैपेंड इन द मॉर्निंग, सम पीपल गॉट अप ऑन द शिप, और उन्होंने कहा कि हम लेबर्स हैं, हम वर्कर्स हैं, जबकि वो रेवोल्यूशनरीज थे, और जाके उठा के उसने चाय की पेटियां जो है समुद्र में फेंकनी शुरू कर दी. पानी गर्म था, लोगों ने चाय बनाई और पी बहुत सारी वहाँ पे फिर. ठीक है, नेचुरल चाय मिली उनको. यही है बोस्टन टी पार्टी जिसको कहते हैं. हाँ, अब वो ज़माना गया, चीनी में चाय हमेशा नहीं मिला के पीते थे. चाय का कंसेप्ट जितना आप लोगों ने चेंज किया उतना तो किसी ने नहीं चेंज किया। चाय का मतलब कभी नहीं होता कि उसमें हम थोड़ी दूध डालेंगे, थोड़ी हम उसमें चीनी डालेंगे, ठीक है। और इंडिया में तो और है मसाला चाय, ठीक है, इंडिया में तो और भी कटिंग चाय तो खैर अलग नहीं, लेकिन फ्रैंकली स्पीकिंग ये जो दूध और चीनी डाल के चाय बनाने वाला कंसेप्ट ब्रिटिशर्स का ही था, पहले वही लोग चाय ऐसे पीते थे, अब उन्होंने ऐसा छोड़ दिया। लेकिन जो ओरिजिनली चाय कहाँ से आई? चाइना से। चाइना में कभी चाय जो है दूध और शक्कर डाल के नहीं पीते थे, चाय हमेशा वो लोग एक उस चाय पत्ती में पानी डाल के ही पीते हैं और उसको कई बार यूज़ करते हैं, 2 से 3 बार यूज़ करते हैं उस चाय को। वो उनका चाय पीने का तरीका अलग है और ये एलीट लोगों का तरीका है चाय पीने का शक्कर डाल के। ओके, दैट्स कॉल्ड एज बोस्टन टी पार्टी. That is considered to be a kind of landmark incident in the history of American Revolution. Why it is considered as the landmark event? Because immediately after that, at least the crown of Britain became very angry, ठीक है, and that's how like he shut down this port. And I hope you can see the location of this port, which was undoubtedly very active, ठीक है. So it was a very active port of America, and without this port there must be great financial loss to America as well, and of course the American merchants, the American traders at one hand. On the other hand, we can talk about of course the British traders also. So what happens here, the British crown came up with some sort of strict measures. He shut down this port and categorically said that until and unless the loss which was faced by the merchants, the British merchants, was compensated, the port is never going to reopen, ठीक है. अब ये जो हुआ, ये डेडलॉक काफ़ी लंबा चल गया. एक तरफ रेवोल्यूशनरीज एडमेंट थे कि हम इसका कोई कॉम्पनसेशन नहीं देंगे, ऑन द अदर हैंड द ब्रिटिश क्राउन वाज आल्सो वेरी एडमेंट कि हमें कॉम्पनसेशन चाहिए. और इस कॉम्पनसेशन के बाद क्या होता है कि फाइनली दोनों तरफ से कुछ प्रेशर्स आते हैं. और इन दिस पर्टिकुलर प्रेशर सम लिबरल पॉलिसीज और सम लिबरल चेंजेस वर ब्रॉट, बट देन द आइडियल एनवायरनमेंट ऑफ द रेवोल्यूशन वाज ऑलरेडी prepared. Now in this situation, now when it seemed that the revolution or a kind of conflict between these two is most probably going to take place, so the preparation had started from both the sides. Specifically the preparation has started from the American sides, ठीक है. Now the first Continental Congress was called, and in first Continental Congress they have asked categorically to the members of the other colonies that the strategy and plan and everything, and that's a kind of hidden preparation of the war had started. And then finally it goes up to what, it goes up to basically, I must say, it goes up to that whole sort of preparation. And of course France was also looking for its own benefit, and this is the reason because of what they had been getting some support from the France also. तो जो भी बहुत लिमिटेड इनके पास रिसोर्सेज थे, उस लिमिटेड रिसोर्सेज में भी जो है इन लोगों ने तैयारी शुरू कर दी. अब इसके आगे की एक कहानी है जो बड़ी लंबी चलती है, 3 साल के करीब चलती है, 3-4 साल के करीब चलती है. और वहाँ पे क्या है कि फाइनली दैट मोमेंट कम्स कि सैमुअल एडम्स को जो है वो लोग अरेस्ट करना चाहते हैं. देन देयर वर सो मेनी वॉलंटरी सोल्जर्स वर देयर, एंड वहाँ पे एक घोड़े पे पहुँचता है, बहुत लंबे रात भर जो है घोड़ा चला के, और ये सब कहानियाँ हैं, बहुत सारी कहानियाँ हैं, हमारे लिए बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग नहीं है. फिर वो सारी चीज़ें होती है, अमेरिकन वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस ब्रोक आउट, ठीक है. And finally you'll find that this continued for a very longer period of time, and then second Continental Congress was invited. In the second Continental Congress, some they came up with some sort of solid decisions or the concrete decisions, and after that General Haig was the person who was leading the British army. So finally he was defeated on multiple places, and that's how this war got concluded, and finally the declaration of the independence was done by this Continental Congress, and that's how America formally declared itself as independent. That's America आज़ाद हो गई, ठीक है. कहानी है. कौन नहीं, पहले जो जिसको भेजा गया था वो जनरल हेग था जिसको भेजा गया था, ठीक है. कॉर्नवालिस का मैं उस जनरल की बात कर रहा हूँ जो जिसको भेजा गया था इन ऑर्डर टू डिफीट द सोल्जर्स, ठीक है. द पर्सन हु हैड प्लेड द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट रोल. बाद में जो है कॉर्नवालिस को भेजा गया था, ठीक है. सो दैट्स हाउ दिस पर्टिकुलर एपिसोड इज डन. अमेरिका आज़ाद हो गई, बात खत्म हो गई, ठीक है. हाँ बोलो. हाँ आज़ाद हो गए. हाँ, इसी बात पे तुम्हें जिसको बहुत ज़्यादा खुशी है अमेरिका के आज़ाद होने पे, वो लोग खिला दो यार समोसा.
जब फ्रांस को हराया था 7 ईयर वॉर में, फ्रांस की लैंड ग्रैब नहीं की थी इंग्लैंड ने?
किसने? नहीं, यहाँ पे फ्रांस, यहाँ पे इस जगह पे लैंड जो है ग्रैब नहीं. वो फ्रांस का ही है, फ्रांस है, फ्रांस इज स्टिल देयर। हाँ, नो टैक्स। अच्छा, यहाँ पे एक दो चीज़ें हैं अभी, सबसे बड़ी बात है, एक थॉमस पेन की बहुत इंपॉर्टेंस है। थॉमस पेन और ऐसे जो आइडियाज़ है, नो टैक्सेशन विदाउट विदाउट रिप्रेजेंटेशन। तो जस्ट नाउ आई डिस्कस अबाउट द फर्स्ट, इट वाज यूज्ड बाय क्या, पैट्रिक हेनरी। और दूसरा जो है थॉमस पेन का एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट आर्टिकल आया था, दैट्स कॉल्ड एज कॉमन सेंस। ठीक है, सो दीज आर टू राइटिंग्स विच आर टू स्लोगन्स और राइटिंग्स वॉट एवर यू से। ठीक है, दे आर ऑल्सो वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। आई विल कम टू दीज थिंग्स। ठीक है, आई विल कम टू दीज थिंग्स। ठीक है, ये समझ पाए, हैव यू गॉट इट दिस, लाइक व्हाट इज दिस अमेरिकन वॉर ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस, राइट? But then, like this particular thing whatsoever I have discussed, like this is not having the real content to write the answer. ये तो कहानी है जो हम सुन रहे थे, अब हम थोड़ा उसके कंटेंट पे बात करते हैं। ठीक है, so the moment it comes to content, that becomes another challenge. Fine. Okay. So the point is that how come this American Revolution was taken by historians, right? Or what are the different interpretations? So basically, I'll be coming to the same question once again, what I had been discussing just now. So the questions are, the first question is basically that whether it was revolution or not. American Revolution was revolutionary, was a revolution or non-revolutionary. Now try to understand my point. It is called as revolution if there are some great changes, and specifically if these are radical changes, in that case it should be called as revolutionary, right? And if the changes are there, undoubtedly the changes are there, but if the changes can be interpreted only with respect to, okay, changes can be interpreted only with respect to, let's say, independence, in that case it must be called as non-revolutionary. These are two ideas. So we have to understand exactly what are the real reasons behind the American Revolution. So is it all about, like, the various sort of thing, like, we have just now we have been trying to discuss something, and mostly the things that we have discussed is basically what? The economic factors behind the American Wars of Revolution. That's how, like, we have seen it. But then, like, over the period and from the time of American Revolution till, let's say, 1970s, 80s or 2000, there are several kind of interpretation of American Revolution has been given, and on the basis of this only we'll be understanding that whether it was revolutionary or not, right? Now if you'll see the American history writing, there are three sort of different history writing that could be noticed, and the first, like, which is being called as the first okay, fine. The first, which is called as Puritan school of history writing. The second, which is called as Patrician school, right? And the third, which is called as the professional school of history writing. So these are three different schools of history writing in the history of USA, and in the background of, like, the historiography, will be able to understand it in a better way, right? So the first school, which is the Puritan school, which tries to define everything on the basis of some sort of biblical concepts. Biblical concept का क्या मतलब होता है? They try to understand it with the help of sort of religion, right? So this is a sort of historiography which has tried to compare it with some sort of some sort of religious development. That is the idea. I hope you can understand that this is not very important for us as such. Okay? Then it comes to the patrician school. Which sort of school is this? This is the school which was mainly led by some elite class people, and they have always, like, tried to like portray this, that it is their responsibility to record the things which had happened in past, and that's why they had been writing so many things of American Revolution. But then in their writing, the general tendency or the normal tendency is simply this, that they always wanted to glorify the role of certain fellows. Okay? So when we'll see the writing of the patricians, in that case you'll find that they have just picked up certain heroes of the American War of Independence. So there was some that I had been already discussing. Either it is Patrick Henry, or it is about Samuel Adams, James Otis, or else we can talk about like some others. So basically they have just picked up them, and they have, like, just highlighted their role, and that's how they were made as the hero. And then finally it comes to the progressive school. And how come the progressive school is different? Because it is the professional school, because ultimately it is the school of professional historians. So you can understand that these two, what I had been discussing, they were not professional. So this is the most important for us. Why? Because ultimately we need to discuss about like American War of Independence as per the various views given by the professional schools, right? We can start this journey, right? We can start this journey from the earliest interpretation that was coming from basically George Bancroft. George Bancroft is the first ever historian who tried to explain the American Revolution. Okay? And according to him, it was just the master plan. It was the master plan of God. So he also says that it was undoubtedly a very radical movement, but this radicalism of the movement was ultimately minimized by saying that it was the master plan of God. भगवान ने ऐसी वो थी सोचा था ऐसा कि ऐसा होगा, और ऐसा हुआ और चीज़ें खत्म हो गई. So that is how he has explained it, George Bancroft. So I hope you can understand कि it is not very important for us. ठीक है, लेकिन जॉर्ज बेनक्रॉफ्ट का नाम इंपॉर्टेंट है, अगर मौका मिले तो आप लिख सकते हैं. ठीक है, मूविंग टू द नेक्स्ट थिंग. ठीक है, नाउ द नेक्स्ट इज द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट स्कूल. नाउ यू लिसन इट वेरी. अच्छा, वन मोर थिंग, व्हेन इट कम्स टू द लाइक दिस स्कूल, जॉर्ज बेनक्रॉफ्ट, ही वाज समटाइम्स इवन केप्ट इन द कैटेगरी ऑफ नेशनलिस्ट स्कूल ऑल्सो. आप स्कूल ज़्यादा याद रखें, इतना ज़्यादा जो है आप हिस्टोरियंस तो याद नहीं रख पाएंगे. ठीक है, सो यू रिमेंबर दैट नेशनलिस्ट पीपल हैव बिलीव दैट इट्स वेरी रैडिकल, बट एट द सेम टाइम दिस आइडिया ऑल्सो हैड, इफ यू आर एबल टू, सारे ऐसी बात नहीं करते, वो मानते हैं बस रेडिकल है, रेवोल्यूशनरी है काफ़ी. रख लेंगे, कोई बात नहीं, लेके चले जाएंगे. कौन? जॉर्ज बेनक्रॉफ्ट बहुत अर्ली टाइम पे लिखते हैं, उस समय इतना स्कूल का नोशन डेवलप नहीं होता है. ठीक है, बहुत शुरुआती दौर में लिख रहे हैं, इमीडिएटली आफ्टर द रेवोल्यूशन ही इज राइटिंग. दैट्स व्हाई इट्स नॉट वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. मैंने बताया कि एक ऐसे भी इंटरप्रिटेशन अमेरिकन हिस्ट्री में है. ठीक है, देन इट कम्स टू द मोस्ट इंपॉर्टेंट वन, दैट्स कॉल्ड एज इंपीरियल स्कूल ऑफ हिस्ट्री राइटिंग. इंपीरियल स्कूल ऑफ हिस्ट्री राइटिंग. ठीक है, इसमें कुछ बड़े इंपॉर्टेंट हिस्टोरियंस हैं, जैसे एक है, कह सकते हैं आप, जॉर्ज एल बियर. इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट हिस्टोरियन, जॉर्ज एल बियर. ठीक है, चार्ल्स एम एंड्रयूज हैं, एंड अनदर इंपॉर्टेंट स्कॉलर. ठीक है, लॉरेंस एच गिब्सन. Lawrence H. Gibson. These are some very prominent scholars that could be noticed in the imperial school, right? Now their stand is very important, like in order to understand it. And in fact, like that should be understood with respect to the basically the circumstances. ठीक है? Circumstances. And what is this circumstance? Immediately after the American War of Independence, what happened further? वो ठीक है, आप लोग बहुत जानते हैं, ठीक है, अमेरिकन वो हुआ, उसके अलावा what was the relationship between Britain and America which continued after that? ट्रेड खत्म हो गया, शुरू हो गया? शुरू हुआ, उसके पहले नहीं चलता था, चलता था ना? तो इसका मतलब क्या है कि द ट्रेड रिलेशनशिप बिटवीन दीज टू continued. Now, what is the point to be noted that actually the American Revolution, though it is a kind of it's a full-fledged war, took place between the Britain and America, and after that, more or less, we can say the like relationship between America and Britain was restored. Okay? The situation continued in the same manner, and in fact, whatever the things being supplied to British industries or the British society by America, raw materials specifically, it continued, and on the other hand, America continued consuming the British industrial products. Okay? And in fact, I hope you can understand that the interest, like the interest of both was in the same thing. Why? Because ultimately, both of them could not have existed without each other, and that's how they have preferred to continue. Now, right now, America is one of the leading industrialist country, but frankly speaking, before 1900, America was not a very leading industrialist country. And the way I did tell you that in the Navigation Act, it was like made sure that America could not become industrialized country. And that's how the prominent industries were not there. And before American Civil War, 1860s, there was no industrialization of America, and it was desperately planned. Why it was desperately planned? Because Britain always wanted the Americans to be the consumer of the British industrial products, and that's how they maintained good relationship. And under this good relationship, what happened? Like they continued this trade, and that's how America also desperately did not industrialize itself before 1860s. And the process of industrialization started after 1860, and within 40 years, you all know that Britain was somehow left behind, and America became the leading industrial country of the world. तो ये जो situation है इनके बीच में, that continued, and once this relationship continued, in that case, what kind of history must be written? I hope you can understand. If at one hand America and Britain both wanted to continue their relationship, in that case, if the history is written in this way that America is fighting against the Britain because Britain wanted to curb the interest and the interest and the privileges of Americans, in that case an anti-British feeling would be there, and that's how this school is coming into existence. And it simply said that there was no conflict between Britain and America. They outrightly said that actually there was no conflict between Britain and America. Then how come we can view this particular the American War of Independence? So basically they simply say that it is just the constitutional issue. It was just the constitutional issue, nothing else. And what is this constitutional issue? So they are simply saying that when you see the American society, right, when you see the American society, now American society was gradually becoming more and more particular and conscious for their liberty, for their right and everything, right. So this society was becoming more democratic in nature. So at one hand you'll find that as far as this American society is there, like so American society was somehow trying to become more liberal, more democratic, and in fact they literally wanted to enjoy the real democratic rights. On the other hand, what happens? The colony was trying to make its policy more and more strict. So मतलब कॉलोनी अपनी कॉलोनाइजेशन को बढ़ाना चाह रहा है और अमेरिकन जो है अपनी इंडिपेंडेंस को बढ़ाना चाह रहे हैं. तो द इशू ऑफ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट वाज सिंपली दिस. And in fact, here it is also said by them that it is not the British Crown which is ideally responsible for this, because there are some ministers present in the in the British Parliament, and they are always known for manipulating the British Crown. So actually, the Crown was unaware of these kind of things. So it was all the fault of the people, those who manipulated the Crown, and that's how this constitutional deadlock was there between these two, and that's how it happened. So there is all about exercising more control, and it's all about the self-government. So as far as the Americans are concerned, they were gradually moving towards what? self-government. On the other hand, what was done by the Britishers? More control. So it is there just like, it was just like, the issue like that. Okay. In fact, it is also said by them that as far as the Americans are concerned, the Americans were very much interested in retaining the situation rather than doing anything. Malab, they were very happy, right? They were very happy with the situation which was present here. So they never wanted any sort of other change. Like they just wanted the constitutional freedom, nothing else. So if like constitutional freedom would have been given to them, they must be very happy with this. उनको और कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता था कि क्या है नहीं है चीजें, ठीक है. So this is what has been said by the imperial historians. So that's how it was done. So that's one sort of historiography. That's known as imperial historiography. Okay. Now, after the imperial historiography, then further you find like a new kind of historiographies are coming, and they had started giving the interpretation in a very different way. So here I can talk about the another most prominent school, that's called as the progressive. Progressive school of history writing. Sorry, Charles से weird है. ये कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट स्कॉलर्स है. कार्ल एल बेकर है, चार्ल्स ए बियर्ड है, ठीक है, एंड ऑर्थर एम स्लेसिंगर है, ठीक है. ये कुछ स्कॉलर्स है. इसका मैसेज आया नहीं, मत करो यार, छोड़ दो. हाँ, स्लेसिंगर जी, सिंगर गाना वाले, गाने वाला सिंगर. ऑर्थर, ये तीन है. इनके स्टैंड्स बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है यार, ठीक है. इन लोगों ने पूरे अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन को दो तरीके से देखा, और इनफैक्ट दैट्स लाइक इम्पॉर्टेंट. You remember this fellow, like this fellow is very important because he is the person who is talking about the American Revolution as dual revolution, right? Let's see how come like he talks about the dual revolution. Understand his point of view. Like who is this person? कौन था? कार्ल एल बेकर. बेकर क्या कहते हैं कि अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन जो है एक्चुअली क्या है, एक ड्यूअल रेवोल्यूशन है. ड्यूअल रेवोल्यूशन कैसे? लाइक इट्स बीइंग फ्रंट बीइंग फॉट इन ऑन टू डिफरेंट फ्रंट्स, ठीक है. सो देयर आर लाइक टू रेवोल्यूशंस गोइंग ऑन पैरेलली. So according to him, there is one revolution which is going to decide that who among the Americans or Britishers going to continue their rule over America. So this particular war had to decide that among the Britishers and the Americans who are going to continue their rule over it. So it had to be decided that whether America is further going to be a colonized country or not. ठीक है? Is going to be a colony of Britain or not? That's one question. ठीक है? And that's how, if it is about this, in that case I hope you all can understand कि in that case we can call it कि it is nothing but American War of Independence. And the second question that has to be decided here is basically that among the Americans, who is going to rule? Who is going to rule on America? And as per the second definition, what exactly it is? It is revolution. So if we'll see his Carl L. Baker's view, in that case you'll find that this person has actually explained the revolution into multiple ways. So one stand is simply this: among the Americans and the Britishers, it had to be decided who is going to continue their rule. So if Britain was successful, in that case colonization would have continued. If Americans were successful, in that case the freedom must have started. So that's how it has to decide, or it could be called as the American War of Independence simply. But he says that actually if you'll see the American War of Revolution, so it was a dual revolution, and then another struggle was going on. After the success of the Americans, it had to be also decided that among the various classes, which class is going to rule over America. And in fact, this whole narrative is based on certain things. Let me tell you, according to them, you remember I told you that in 1769-70, in 1769-70, what happened? This movement was started already. And by which class? I told you that something has happened. And what was the thing that I did tell you? I told you about the boycott. And which class was doing it? The boycott of the various products? बॉयकॉट हमेशा याद रखे कि अगर पुअर क्लास अगर ये करती है ना, अगर मतलब जो है लोअर क्लास अगर बॉयकॉट करती है, उसका बहुत फ़र्क नहीं पड़ता है. बॉयकॉट का सबसे फ़र्क पड़ता है कि एलीट क्लास या मर्चेंट क्लास अगर सपोर्ट करती है तो उससे फ़र्क पड़ता है. द मोमेंट दे रिफ्यूज टू कीप द फॉरेन प्रोडक्ट्स, द मोमेंट दे रिफ्यूज टू सेल द फॉरेन प्रोडक्ट्स, द मोमेंट दे रिफ्यूज टू इम्पोर्ट द फॉरेन प्रोडक्ट्स, देन देयर इज़ अ सीवियर फिनेंशियल लॉस. अगर आप बोलेंगे कि मैं यार कल से चाइनीज़ सामान इस्तेमाल नहीं करूँगा, तो अगर आपको लगता है कि चाइना को बहुत फ़र्क पड़ जाएगा इससे, तो ऐसा कुछ नहीं होने वाला. क्योंकि लोग अल्टीमेटली क्या होता है बोलते हैं, और इसके बहुत एग्जाम्पल्स भी हैं कि इस कंट्री का हम सामान इस्तेमाल नहीं करेंगे, बट द मोमेंट इट कम्स टू द एक्चुअल सिचुएशन, दे आर नॉट इवन थिंकिंग ऑफ वेदर इट इज़ द इंडियन प्रोडक्ट और द चाइनीज़ प्रोडक्ट और एनी अदर प्रोडक्ट. उनको दिखेगा ये मिल रहा है 100 रुपये का, ये मिल रहा है 10 रुपये का, तो प्रेफरेंस इज ऑलवेज. तो गॉट द पॉइंट. तो बॉयकॉट हमेशा सक्सेसफुल तब होता है जब उस क्लास के पार्टिसिपेशन से फर्क पड़े. ठीक है. सो बेसिकली अकॉर्डिंग टू हिम कि देयर वाज वन मूवमेंट दैट हैज ऑलरेडी स्टार्टेड, बट देन दिस वाज डन बाय विच सॉर्ट ऑफ पीपल, एज आई एम टेलिंग यू, द एलीट सेक्शंस ऑफ द सोसाइटी. एंड दिस एलीट सेक्शंस ऑफ सोसाइटी वाज बेसिकली व्हाट सॉर्ट ऑफ ग्रुप इट वाज? इट वाज अ कंजर्वेटिव ग्रुप. It was a conservative group, right? So conservative matlab I'm simply saying कि they were not very radical as such. So according to Carl L. Baker, initially that movement was started by whom? The elite section, the boycott and everything. But what sort of group it was? It was a very conservative group, right? And that's how they could not be called by any chance as radicals. वो लोग radicals तो नहीं है बिल्कुल. ठीक है. और जैसे ही इनको फिनेंशियल लॉस शुरू होता है, दे आर जस्ट मूविंग आउट फ्रॉम द मूवमेंट, एंड देन इट वाज फर्दर लेड बाय विच सॉर्ट ऑफ पीपल? देन दे आर सेइंग कि इट वाज स्टार्टेड बाय द, इट वाज कंटिन्यूड बाय द लोअर क्लासेस, एंड दैट्स हाउ द मूवमेंट बिकम्स रैडिकल नाउ. So you will find that 1768, 69, 70, it was the conservative group which started, but then immediately after seeing their loss, they came out of the movement, and in fact, it is that group which always wanted to continue their relationship with Britain. Why? Because by continuing the relationship with the Britain, they must have been continue with their profit. It was the lower class which was against this idea, and that's how after 1773, like people like Samuel Adams and so on, they were taking a radical stand, and they have gone for taking this particular movement further. So when America achieves its independence, it is the lower class which was providing the leadership to American War of Independence, or let's say American Revolution. So if you'll see the American War of Independence, as I've already told you, so if you'll see it here, right, if you'll see it here, in that case it is not revolutionary, it's merely the War of Independence. But then immediately after the conclusion of the war, it has decided that which class is going to rule over America. So it was undoubtedly the lower class which is going to rule over America, and that's how it should be called as the American Revolution. ठीक है? Now it comes to another person, like that person has also presented it in a very unique way, and that was called as, no, which one was the second person I did tell you? चार्ल्स से बियर्ड. चार्ल्स से बियर्ड का आइडिया यार बहुत प्रोग्रेसिव है, ठीक है, और यही वजह है कि कम से कम इसका नाम आपको कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि आप लिखे, चार्ल्स से बियर्ड, चार्ल्स से Charles A. Beard. Charles A. Beard has never studied the American War of Independence or American Revolution. Charles A. Beard has written his book on basically the process of constitution making. The process of constitution making. He has written about that. So then why are we discussing about him here? We are discussing about him here for a reason, right? According to Charles A. Beard, there is a process which continuously goes on in this world. And what is that? The moment you see any revolution that was always challenged by a counter revolution, and then again you see revolution. So it's a process which goes on continuously. ये चार्ल्स ए बियर्ड कहते हैं, राइट? वो बोलते हैं जब भी कोई रेवोल्यूशन होता है तो उस रेवोल्यूशन को अंडरमाइन करने के लिए क्या होता है? एक काउंटर रेवोल्यूशन होता है, क्योंकि रेवोल्यूशन हमेशा रैडिकल है. एंड इमीडिएटली आफ्टर द रेवोल्यूशन you'll find some of the great changes. Immediately after the revolution you find some of the great changes, and maybe there's a greater, like, you know, or there's a major percentage or there's a bigger percentage of people, those who are not very happy with this changes, and that's how counter revolution is there. Okay? So when it comes to the revolution, so what exactly is this? The American Revolution. The American Revolution is very much revolutionary, but the moment it comes to the counter revolution, what is this? So according to him, the constitution making is nothing but a kind of counter revolution process. तो बोलते हैं अगर अमेरिकन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन राइटिंग जो है काउंटर रेवोल्यूशन है, इसका मतलब अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन क्या था? रेवोल्यूशनरी था. तो दैट्स हाउ ही प्रूव्स हिज आइडिया दैट अल्टीमेटली अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन वाज वेरी रेवोल्यूशनरी. इसके बाद जो अमेरिकन सिविल वॉर है उसको कहते हैं कि रेवोल्यूशनरी है वो नेचर में. कैसे? थोड़ा मैं बता देता हूँ आपको. हाँ, वो कहते हैं कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकिंग में क्या हो रहा है. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकिंग में कहते हैं कि दो अलग अलग ग्रुप्स देखने को मिलते हैं, जो हम बाद में बात करेंगे. एक वर्जीनिया प्लान है और एक न्यू जर्सी प्लान है. तो कहते हैं कि दीज आर टू डिफरेंट प्लान्स एंड देयर इज ए काइंड ऑफ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट इन द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकिंग, एंड immediately before this constitution there's something that could be noticed is called as, there was a document, that document which is called as Article of Confederation. ठीक है? आर्टिकल ऑफ कॉन्फेडरेशन के प्रोविजंस को अगर आप देखेंगे तो आपको एक चीज समझ में आएगी, बड़ा रैडिकल डॉक्यूमेंट है वो. आर्टिकल ऑफ कॉन्फेडरेशन जिसके हिसाब से अमेरिकन कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन कम से कम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन के पास होने तक चला, किस तरीके का डॉक्यूमेंट है? बड़ा रैडिकल डॉक्यूमेंट है. तो इसको लिंक कैसे करते हैं कि देखो हुआ क्या अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन में, पहले एक कंजर्वेटिव ग्रुप आया, उनको किसी चीज़ से प्रॉब्लम थी. किस चीज़ से प्रॉब्लम थी उस कंजर्वेटिव ग्रुप को? वो जो टैक्सेशन जो इंक्रीज कर रहे हैं, the way the taxes are being increased, they are not okay with that. And once the taxes were being increased, that was undoubtedly they are reducing their profit, and that's how they are not very happy with this. They started a revolution, but the moment they realized that actually they had been facing losses, they just moved out from the movement. So once they moved out from the movement, the charge of this particular movement was taken by whom? The lower classes. So the moment it comes to the successful finishing of the American Revolution, which class has done it? Lower classes. So basically, who is going to frame the shape or who is going to frame the further America? It's the lower class. So the moment it comes to like the question of making the constitution immediately after the American Revolution, which class had to do it? Lower classes. But the moment the elite class had realized that now the powers are there under the control of the lower classes and they are going to get a very radical document, they got very scared. And they jumped into the process of the constitution making. And once they jumped into the process of constitution making, now they came up with this idea. अब वो लोग कौन है, मैं आपको ऐसे ही बता देता हूँ थोड़ा. अब आप अमेरिका को देखेंगे तो मैंने पहले भी कहा कि सबसे ज़्यादा एलिट लोग किधर रहते थे? न्यू इंग्लैंड में रहते थे. न्यू इंग्लैंड कैसी जगह है? अर्बनाइज्ड एरिया है, ठीक है. तो अगर न्यू इंग्लैंड अर्बनाइज्ड एरिया है तो वहाँ पे पॉपुलेशन कॉन्सेंट्रेशन क्या होगा? ज़्यादा होगा. एग्रीकल्चर वहाँ पे होता नहीं है, तो वहाँ पे पॉपुलेशन डेंसिटी जो है वो कैसी है? ज़्यादा है. गॉट माई पॉइंट है ना? It's an urban settlement, ठीक है. There is no great amount of farming over here, cultivation over here, and that's why the population density was more. On the other hand, if we'll talk about the South America, in that case, you'll find that the vast amount of land is there, but the population density is less. तो elite class क्या propose करेंगे कि representative किसके बेस पे चुना जाना चाहिए? Population के बेस पे. क्योंकि अगर representative population के बेस पे चुने जाएंगे तो सबसे ज़्यादा representative कहाँ से आएंगे? न्यू इंग्लैंड से, और साउथ से कम आएगा, जबकि ज़मीन साउथ के पास बहुत ज़्यादा है. अभी आपने उसको मैप में देखा, ठीक है. सो दे डेफिनेटली हैड ह्यूज अमाउंट ऑफ लैंड, बट द पॉइंट इज दैट रिप्रेजेंटेटिव वुड बी लेस. तो व्हाट हैपेंस, द एलीट क्लासेस लाइक दे आर सजेस्टिंग दिस प्लान कि इट शुड बी ऑन बेस्ड ऑफ द पॉपुलेशन. और जो ऑपोजिट है, जो रेवोल्यूशनरीज थे, वो क्या बोलते हैं? नहीं भाई, ये उसके बेस पे नहीं होना चाहिए, ये किसके बेस पे होना चाहिए? एरिया के बेस पे होना चाहिए. रिप्रेजेंटेशन किसके बेस पे होना चाहिए? एरिया के बेस पे. तो जो लोग रेवोल्यूशनरीज थे वो लोग एरिया के बेस पे जो है रिकमेंड कर रहे थे. जब एलीट क्लासेस को लगा कि उनकी प्रिविलेजेस चली जाएगी, क्योंकि उनकी प्रिविलेजेस भी देखो किस चीज़ में है, वो क्या एक्सपोर्ट करते थे, जो चीज़ें साउथ प्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं. तो जिस दिन साउथ अपने आप में जो है ऑटोनॉमी मिल जाएगी एक तरीके से, सो दे वुड स्टार्ट एक्सपोर्टिंग देयर स्टफ बाय देयर ओन. So they never wanted the South to enjoy this privilege, and that's why they wanted to be in this like in a process, and they wanted to continue this situation. और unfortunately ये हुआ भी अमेरिका में पहले 100 सालों में आप जितने भी वो देखेंगे, प्रेसिडेंट देखेंगे, उसमें से 2 को छोड़ के ज़्यादातर कहाँ से आए? नॉर्थ से. सिर्फ 2 को छोड़ के, और जैफरसन और जैक्सन 2 सिर्फ प्रेसिडेंट है जो नॉर्थ से नहीं है, वो भी मिडिल कॉलोनी से, वो एक एग्जैक्ट साउथ से नहीं है. वो कभी साउथ में उसके माँ बाप रहते थे, माइग्रेट करके मिडिल कॉलोनीज में आ गए थे, फिर वहाँ से आते हैं. तो साउथ का कोई आदमी कभी प्रेसिडेंट नहीं बनता. सो ए सॉर्ट ऑफ इम्पैरिटी, ए सॉर्ट ऑफ इनजस्टिस कैन बी नोटिस इन अमेरिका, एंड दैट्स व्हाई कॉल्ड सिविल वॉर एज द काउंटर रेवोल्यूशन. Civil war is a revolution. क्यों? क्योंकि South is trying once again back, to get their powers. So basically, that's how, according to him, that this process of constitution making is a counter revolution. So if it is a counter revolution, then it was revolutionary in nature. That's how Charles A. Beard has put forward his idea. I hope you have understood the point. कहाँ गायब हो दुबे आज? मैसेज आ गया क्या? हाँ, मैसेज नहीं आया. इसको बहुत पता होता है यार. ये पॉइंट समझ में आया? प्रोग्रेसिव के पॉइंट्स आपको समझ में आए? हैव यू गॉट दिस पॉइंट्स? लाइक हाउ कम द प्रोग्रेसिव हैव interpreted it? So for the conservative, right, or the the group which was there previously, that that particular group was never believed that it was revolutionary, the imperial group. But the progressive group has categorically accepted that yes, it was revolutionary. So it is depending on very much the factors which were responsible for bringing this American revolution, or the process also, right? Okay, so fine. After this, like this is the period till 1940s and 50s. तब तक ऐसी हिस्ट्री लिखते हैं अमेरिका में, ठीक है. इसके बाद
ये कोई फिनोमेना है कि ऐसा ही होता है, अगर अदर कंट्रीज में भी देखेंगे जहाँ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकिंग है तो वहाँ इस तरह के रेवोल्यूशन देखने को मिलने चाहिए?
नहीं, आई एम नॉट सेइंग कि इट इज़ ए फेनोमेना, ठीक है. बट येस, इन अमेरिकन कॉन्टेक्स्ट इट कैन बी नोटिस, बट देन यू कैन एक्चुअली अप्लाई दिस आइडिया ऑन ए वाइडर बैकग्राउंड ऑल्सो. कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकिंग इज हमेशा दैट सॉर्ट ऑफ सेटलमेंट, ठीक है. अगर बाद में बात करेंगे इसमें, छोड़ा नहीं जाऊंगा मैं इसमें, ठीक है, ओके फाइन। 1940s 50s से अमेरिकन हिस्ट्री फिर से चेंज कर जाती है एक बार, ठीक है। 1940s तक ऐसा चला, मतलब 1940s तक लोग बोलते रहे नहीं यार इट वाज ए क्लास स्ट्रगल। इनफैक्ट यू ऑल विल रिमेंबर दैट द प्रोग्रेसिव्स वेरी कैटेगोरिकली दे आर सेइंग कि अल्टीमेटली व्हाट इज इट, क्लास स्ट्रगल। वो क्लास स्ट्रगल पे इतना कैटेगोरिकली नहीं बोलते हैं जितना वो बोलते हैं कि इकोनॉमिक रीजंस आर वेरी मच interested, because the moment you say the class struggle, the same ideas were presented by the Marxist scholars for American Revolution, so they have used the term class struggle. Whether the others were simply telling, the progressive were simply telling कि the conflict within the various communities or the various sections of American society, and the second, the economic reasons were primarily responsible for the American Revolution, and that's how it was revolutionary in nature. The moment it comes to the next one, ठीक है, the next one is basically, yeah, I was just discussing the situation. 1950s किसके लिए जाना जाता है? कोल्ड वॉर के लिए। तो एक बात बताओ, जब कोल्ड वॉर आएगा, ठीक है, तो कोल्ड वॉर के समय मैं फिर से, शायद पहले भी हमने एक बात की थी, जब कोल्ड वॉर अमेरिका दुनिया में फैल गया, और दो पावर्स आपको भी पता है, द फर्स्ट वर्ल्ड इज अमेरिका, द सेकेंड वर्ल्ड इज रसिया, यूएसएसआर। और जब ऐसा है तो दोनों एक दूसरे में दोनों ही बाकी के वर्ल्ड में अपने अपने आइडियाज़ को प्रमोट करने की कोशिश कर रहे थे। एंड इन फैक्ट बोथ ऑफ देम वर वेरी डेस्परेट दैट रेस्ट ऑफ द वर्ल्ड, स्पेसिफिकली द थर्ड वर्ल्ड, शुड फॉलो ईदर कैपिटलिज्म और सोशलिज्म। और इसके कुछ कंट्रीज ने बहुत सही मजे लिए, ठीक है, उसने बोला कि हाँ हम ठीक है कैपिटलिस्ट अच्छा लगता है, हम कैपिटलिस्ट हो जाएंगे, तो अमेरिका ने बोला ले जाओ पैसे इतने। फिर कुछ कंट्रीज ने कहा, कुछ कंट्री दूसरे कंट्री को जाके कहा नहीं नहीं सोशलिज्म बहुत इन्फ्लुएंस करता है हमें तो सोशलिस्ट कंट्री बनाना है, तो उसने कहा ले जाओ पैसे ले जाओ, ठीक है। तो ऐसे करके देश चलाया बहुत दिनों तक, ऐसे करके बहुत दिनों तक देश चलाया। बट एक चीज, हम यहाँ पे बाकी दुनिया के बारे में बात नहीं कर रहे, अमेरिका क्या चाहता था, वेदर द कैपिटलिज्म शुड सोशलिज्म शुड इंटर इनटू देयर कंट्री और नॉट? नहीं, ऑफ कोर्स नहीं। Because by 1900, as I did tell you, that America became a superpower in industrialization, and between 1900 to 1950, अमेरिका आपको क्यों लगता है कि इतना इंटरेस्ट क्यों लेता था वर्ल्ड वॉर में और इधर इंडोनेशिया में और इधर जाके अमेरिका को डीकॉलोनाइज करवाना था? क्यों? क्योंकि द मोमेंट द डीकॉलोनाइजेशन इज डन, अमेरिका वुड बी एबल टू सेल देयर स्टफ टू दीज कंट्रीज, और खासकर थर्ड वर्ल्ड कंट्रीज में। तो अमेरिका का सिंपल लॉजिक जिसकी वजह से वो इंटर करता है इन पॉलिटिक्स में, वो यही है कि 1900 तक आते आते 1860 में उन लोगों ने अपना जो है वो शुरू किया था इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन का प्रोसेस, और 1900 तक वो लोग इस सिचुएशन में पहुंच जाते हैं जहाँ पे उनके पास इतना सरप्लस हो गया था, अब उनको थर्ड वर्ल्ड के कंट्रीज चाहिए थे, क्योंकि यूरोपियन कंट्रीज तो उससे खरीदेंगे नहीं। क्यों? क्योंकि यूरोपियन कंट्रीज के तो अपनी इंडस्ट्रीज है, तो मार्केट पॉसिबिलिटी कहाँ थी मार्केट की? थर्ड वर्ल्ड कंट्रीज में। तो इसकी वजह से क्या रहा कि दे हैड बीन डेस्परेटली लुकिंग फॉर द थर्ड वर्ल्ड कंट्रीज, राइट? एंड व्हाट दे डिड, लाइक यू नो, दे नाउ entered into that politics, but immediately after the second world war situation somehow became more complex. अब एक बात ये भी बता दो यार कि जो सोशलिज्म की एंट्री का सबसे बेस्ट पॉसिबिलिटी किधर होता है? क्यों? सोशलिज्म की एंट्री के लिए सबसे बेस्ट पॉसिबिलिटी सबसे पहले अमेरिका में है। जितना कैपिटलिस्ट कंट्री होगा सोशलिज्म का आइडिया उतना ज्यादा पेनिट्रेट करेगा उस सोसाइटी में, क्योंकि कैपिटलिज्म मतलब बाइपोलराइजेशन ऑफ द सोसाइटी, द क्लास डिस्टिंक्शन इन द सोसाइटी। सो विद विच एवर, अब इंडियन सोसाइटी में पूछोगे सोशलिज्म इंटर करेगा, बड़ा मुश्किल है यार। एग्रीकल्चरिस्ट सोसाइटी पता ही नहीं चलता कौन किस क्लास को बिलोंग करता है। एक आदमी के पास 1 बीघे जमीन है, एक के पास 5, एक के पास 10, एक के पास 15, एक के पास 25, ठीक है, तो पता ही नहीं चल रहा, खेत सब जोत रहे। एक जमींदार को छोड़ दो तो क्लास को तय करना बड़ा मुश्किल हो जाता है। लेकिन एक इंडस्ट्रियल सोसाइटी में समहाउ देयर इज मोर कॉन्शियसनेस फॉर द क्लास, एटलीस्ट एट दैट पॉइंट ऑफ टाइम द सिचुएशन हैड स्टार्टेड चेंजिंग, बिकॉज जो मार्क्स के आइडिया को सबसे पहले फेल करके दिखाने वाले हैं वो अमेरिकन इंडस्ट्रीज है, क्योंकि अमेरिकन इंडस्ट्रीज में ही सबसे पहले लेयर्स के कंसेप्ट वो लोग लेके आते हैं। बट देन दे वर वेरी स्केयर्ड ऑफ दिस आइडिया ऑफ सोशलिज्म, सो दे नीडेड टू स्टॉप द एंट्री ऑफ सोशलिज्म. So understand my point, if they really needed to stop the idea of socialism or the entry of socialism into America, in that case what they were supposed to do? क्या करना चाहिए था उनको? उनको बहुत सारी चीज़ें उन्होंने की, लेकिन एक चीज़ उन्होंने किया, हिस्ट्री में किया, उन्होंने क्या किया, वो ये दिखाना चाहते थे डेस्परेटली कि अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में कभी भी क्लास कॉन्फ्लिक्ट जैसी कोई चीज़ थी ही नहीं. And that's how, like, you know, a group of history writing appeared here, that's called as neo-conservative. कंजर्वेटिव। कौन से? 1950s ऑनवर्ड्स, कोल्ड वॉर के दौर में नियो कंजर्वेटिव हिस्टोरियंस। और जब सरकार को किसी तरीके की हिस्ट्री को प्रमोट करना होता है तो आपको भी पता है कि सरकार बहुत सिंपल एक तरीका होता है कि जो प्रोजेक्ट्स उनके हिसाब से उनको स्पॉन्सरशिप या फंडिंग्स बढ़ा देती है। जैसे इंडियन कॉन्टेक्स्ट में ICHR इज वन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन विच लाइक नॉर्मली स्पॉन्सर्स द लाइक हिस्टोरिकल रिसर्चर्स। अब आप एक किताब लेके जाएंगे, वहाँ पे बोलेगा कि इंडिया में ज़बरदस्त क्लास स्ट्रगल था, ठीक है, और एक आदमी किताब लेके जाएगा कि उसमें कहा जाए छोड़ दो यार, कुछ ऐसा ऑपोजिट आइडिया। तो ये उस पर डिपेंड करती है कि वो किसको स्पॉन्सर करेगी। एक को बोलेगा नहीं यार तुम्हारे प्रोजेक्ट में जान नहीं है, ले जाओ, और दूसरे को जो उसके आइडियाज़ को हिट कर रहा है, ठीक है, तो उसको कहेगा कि नहीं ये प्रोजेक्ट अच्छा। बहुत सिंपल से खूब फंडिंग कर दी ऐसे प्रोफेसर्स को जो लोग थोड़े उस विंग से लिखते हैं। तो जो लोग कंजर्वेटिव थे ऐसे स्कॉलर्स को फंडिंग की गई, खूब फंडिंग की गई अमेरिका में, और गवर्नमेंट ने फंडिंग दी। और उसकी वजह से क्या होता है कि एक स्कूल निकल के आता है, द स्कॉलर्स नियो कंजर्वेटिव। सो फ्रॉम द नेम इटसेल्फ इट्स वेरी क्लियर, from the name itself it's very clear that what they must be talking about. Of course they talked about American society in the as a unified society, but then you should remember one more thing, that can you stop the entry of ideas in any place? Is it possible for someone that the ideas can be stopped from the promotion? नहीं, ideas को नहीं रोक सकते ना। दूसरी एक बहुत important चीज़ है, 1950s is known for some of the very radical movements in America. Which sort of movements these were? Sorry? सिविल राइट्स से ज़्यादा इसका इट इज़ नॉन फॉर द एफ्रो अमेरिकन मूवमेंट्स, ठीक है। सो इफ़ दैट मूवमेंट एंड इनफैक्ट मार्टिन लूथर किंग एंड ऑल दीज पीपल, ठीक है, मैल्कम एक्स, ठीक है, ये सारे जो इंपॉर्टेंट लीडर्स हैं ना, जो सिविल वॉर्स के, सिविल राइट्स के लिए, या फिर जो है अफ्रीकन राइट्स के लिए, अफ्रीकन अमेरिकन के राइट्स के लिए लड़ते हैं, वो सब मोरलेस इसी टाइम पे एक्टिव है। तो एक बात बताओ यार, जब सोसाइटी में आपके बहुत सारे स्ट्रगल्स चल रहे हैं, और वो किसके लिए है? वो थोड़े राइट्स के लिए है, और खासकर जो है वो स्लेव राइट्स के लिए है। सो डज इट लिटरली प्रूव दैट योर सोसाइटी इज ऑल अबाउट यूनिफॉर्मिटी एंड देन कंसेंसस? नो। So basically at the same time you'll find another group is also there, and they are called as neo-progressive. So there's two schools could be noticed in 1950s onwards, neo-conservative and neo-progressive. Now among the neo-conservatives, there are two scholars, they are very popular, called as Robert E. Brown and Daniel J. Bernstein. ठीक है, दो scholars हैं, Robert E. Brown and Daniel J. Bernstein. Daniel J. Bernstein. अब ये क्या कहते हैं? लाइक दे आर प्रेजेंटिंग द सेम आइडिया, ठीक है, सेम आइडिया विथ सम फ्रेश सेट ऑफ एग्जाम्पल्स. एंड व्हाट आर दीज? एग्जैक्टली द ये they believe that American society was democratic since beginning. The American society is democratic always, not even since beginning, democratic. तो कहते कि अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में कुछ चेंज करने की जरूरत थी ही नहीं. There was no radical change required in America. क्या स्थिति, कहाँ खोई हुई है, कहाँ खोई हुई है? Where are you lost? आज क्लास में बहुत लोग देखते हैं खोए खोए से हैं. हाँ, वो तो मुस्कुरा रहा है बहुत देर से देख रहे. हाँ, एक तो मुस्कुराने वाला था ही, अब तो और आगे मुस्कुराने वाले. रिजेक्ट करेगा ऑफ कोर्स. तो ये लोग बोलते हैं एग्जैक्टली, तो ये बोलते हैं अमेरिकन सोसाइटी शुरुआत से ही डेमोक्रेटिक है. वो कहते हैं इसके वैल्यूज़ बड़े क्लियर है, ठीक है, बोलते हैं इसके वैल्यूज़ को लेकर कोई पंगा नहीं है. और जब क्लास की बात आती है तो ये बोलते हैं कि अमेरिकन सोसाइटी हमेशा उसको पता है कि जो प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स है उसको रेस्पेक्ट देना है, ओपनली एक्सेप्ट कर रहे हैं. तो तो बोलते लोगों में ऐसी कोई मतलब ग्रीवेंसेस थे ही नहीं कि वो अमीर है मैं गरीब हूँ, उसको पता था कि हाँ वो आदमी मेहनत करता है वो अमीर है मैं गरीब हूँ, सो देयर वाज नो क्लास स्ट्रगल एवर लाइक इन प्रिवेलिंग इन अमेरिका। तो बोलते हैं अमेरिकन सोसाइटी डेमोक्रेटिक है, जैसे अभी डेमोक्रेटिक है ना सोसाइटी, उस डेमोक्रेटिक सोसाइटी में क्या होता है कि देयर आर सम पीपल डेफिनेटली दे आर रिच, बट देन वी डू नॉट हैव सो मेनी प्रॉब्लम्स विद दैट बिकॉज यू नो दैट लाइक दे हैव बिकम द रिच लाइक बाय पुटिंग देयर हार्ड वर्क और देयर टैलेंट और सम अदर थिंग। तो वो बोलते हैं कि प्रॉपर्टी को लेकर अमेरिका में बहुत क्लियर नोशन है कि यस इट इज द प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स आर प्रॉपरली रेस्पेक्टेड इन अमेरिकन सोसाइटी एंड द सोसाइटी इज डेमोक्रेटिक, सो इट इज ऑल्सो ट्रू दैट द पीपल आर नॉट डिप्राइव्ड विद some sort of basic amenities and all, and that's how the society was since beginning a democratic society, right? It's a democratic society. So then why was this struggle? So the struggle was for this reason that the further policies brought by the Britain, right, specifically after 1763, they were changing this democratic policies of America. वो बोलते हैं पॉलिसीज वो डेमोक्रेसी को खराब कर रही है, तो कहते हैं कि फिर लड़ किस ले रहे हैं, in order to preserve the previous social order.
मतलब ये उससे वार ऑफ इंडिपेंडेंस से पहले डेमोक्रेसी थी ये कहते हैं।
हाँ ये बोलते हैं अमेरिकन सोसाइटी हमेशा से डेमोक्रेटिक सोसाइटी है, हाँ वो बोलते हैं it's all about consensus, like they are also using one term, they are saying कि American society is all about consensus. आज के टाइम का नहीं पता हमें, ठीक है, अमेरिकन सोसाइटी वॉज प्रिसाइजली कॉन्सेंसस, ठीक है, उसमें कोई कॉन्फ्लिक्ट थे ही नहीं अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में, ऐसा वो कहते हैं, ठीक है। हाँ बोलो, सेकेंड पॉइंट कौन सा? वो बोलते हैं कि अमेरिकन सोसाइटी जब डेमोक्रेटिक है तो आप नया क्या लेके आओगे, तो बोलते हैं फिर लड़ किस ले रही है, तो बोलते हैं वो लड़ इसलिए रही ताकि अपने प्रिजर्व जो अपने जो वो है प्रीवियस सोशल ऑर्डर है उसको प्रिजर्व कर सके,
जो ब्रिटिशर्स की वजह से भी
जो ब्रिटिशर्स के इन नए पॉलिसीज की वजह से 1763 के बाद जो आ रही है वो खराब कर रही है उसको। ये डीकोलोनाइज भी नहीं कहते, ये बोलते प्रॉब्लम थी नहीं, वो बोलते कि उन्होंने प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट किया तो उसके खिलाफ ये लोग लड़ने लगे। अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में बेसिकली कोई प्रॉब्लम थी नहीं, कोई क्लास की प्रॉब्लम नहीं, कंसेंसस है अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में एंड ऑलवेज दैट यूनिफॉर्मिटी वाज देयर वाज नो चेंज वाज रिक्वायर्ड। सो दिस इज व्हाट हैज बीन सेड बाय द नियो कंजर्वेटिव स्कूल। देन इट कम्स टू नियो प्रोग्रेसिव स्कूल, कुछ नया नहीं बोलते यार, ये फिर से बोलते, और इनका क्या एक नया आइडिया है नियो प्रोग्रेसिव स्कूल में। now these people are saying about a particular group which was present in America, and they have been highlighting this group which is called as the loyalist group. What is this loyalist group? जो लोग अभी भी ब्रिटेन के बड़े लॉयल हैं, तो बोलते कौन लोग हैं जो ब्रिटेन के लॉयल हैं, जिनका प्रॉफिट सिक्योर होता था ब्रिटेन से, वो लोग लॉयल है उसके। तो बोलते जितने ये एलीट क्लास है, न्यू इंग्लैंड के मर्चेंट्स और ये सारे लोग हैं, कौन है, दे आर वेरी लॉयल पीपल टू। So since they are very loyal to them, and this is the reason because of what, like you have to understand that the differences were there in American society, right? So that's how we can talk about like that these are in a various group. But then last I'll discuss about one sort of segment or one sort of new historiography that's called as the ideological school. Ideological school. And from this perspective, so far the American history was not being studied, okay? And the most important person who had written the history with this idea, now his name, the way I told you, Charles A. Beard's name is very important. You forget all the names, okay, but write the name of Charles A. Beard, okay? In the same way, I can say कि you have to write the name of Bernard Bailyn. वही है सारे पुराने, बर्नार्ड बेलिन। इनका क्या है, इनकी किताब का ही नाम है द आइडियोलॉजिकल ओरिजिन ऑफ अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन। द नेम ऑफ द बुक इटसेल्फ इज आइडियोलॉजिकल ओरिजिन ऑफ अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन। origin of American Revolution. ideological origin of American Revolution. Now what is this ideological origin of American Revolution? It's very simple. ठीक है, they are saying कि like this one aspect of this revolution has been altogether ignored, and what was that? The ideas. So how come the ideas have played very significant role? And for proving his point, this is the person who had studied Thomas Paine, ठीक है, और थॉमस पेन के कॉमन सेंस का एप्लीकेशन जो है पूरे यूरोप में भी बहुत माना जाता है, और बहुत सारे यूरोपियन रेवोल्यूशंस हैं जिसमें थॉमस पेन के इस राइटिंग को इंक्लूड करते हैं. एंड अपार्ट फ्रॉम दैट, लाइक द राइटिंग ऑफ थॉमस पेन, ही इज ऑल्सो स्टडिंग द वेरियस pamphlets which were published during the American War of Independence. American War of Independence के दौरान pamphlets का culture था, and the pamphlets were printed and they were circulated in order to motivate the people, specifically some leaders like Samuel Adams and all, like they had been circulating these pamphlets. और उन पैम्पलेट्स में जो आइडियाज़ है ना, उसको स्टडी करके बोलते हैं यार कैसे बोल सकते हो कि ये सिर्फ इकोनॉमिक रीजंस है या कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल रीजंस है, बोलते हैं आइडियोलॉजिकल रीजंस भी उतने ही इंपॉर्टेंट हैं. अब क्या आइडियोलॉजिकल रीजंस है? सो द आइडियोलॉजिकल रीजन इज वेरी सिंपली दिस कि दे बिलीव्ड, लिसन इट वेरी केयरफुली, दे बिलीव, राइट, और चार्ल्स बर्नार्ड बेलन बिलीव्स that if we'll talk about the British society, right, it was always habituated of a kind of authoritarian rule. British society was habituated of an authoritarian rule, but the American society is not habituated of an authoritarian rule. And why is so? Because he says that actually if we'll see the grooming of the British society, it has ultimately evolved from which sort of society? Feudal society. तो बोलते फ्यूडल सोसाइटी से इवॉल्व करके कितना रेडिकल बन जाओगे यार, हो रेडिकल, लेकिन इतने रेडिकल नहीं हो सकते. वो है, फ्यूडलिज्म अभी भी माइंड में है, और आपको भी पता है कि जिस सोसाइटी में फ्यूडलिज्म रहती है उनके इन्फ्लुएंसेस रहते हैं. आज भी इंडिया में भी एक फ्यूडल मेंटालिटी रहती है, खासकर गांव में अगर आप चले जाएंगे तो रहती है. जिनके पास वाकई बहुत ज़मीन है, बहुत पैसा है, दिखेगा वो फ्यूडल मेंटालिटी है उसमें. और वो जो कहते हैं रस्सी जल गई लेकिन ऐंठन नहीं जलती है, ठीक है, ऐसे लोग आपको मिलेंगे. आप देख लीजिए किसी से गांव में जाके मिलिए, 50-100 बीघे ज़मीन है तो सीधे चलते ही नहीं है, चाल थोड़ी टेढ़ी रहती है उनकी. तो फ्यूडलिज्म ऐसा नोशन है. अच्छा, आप देखेंगे कई ऐसे मुझे बच्चे मिलते हैं जो आते गाँव से हैं, ठीक है, लेकिन यहाँ एक एटीट्यूड रहता है उनके अंदर. क्यों? वो गाँव के उस फ्यूडल लॉर्ड के घर से आया है, तो उसको लगता है आई एम वेरी सुपीरियर, डिफरेंट. वो रहते हैं उसमें, वो ना बहुत जल्दी लोगों से घुलेंगे मिलेंगे नहीं, ठीक है, थोड़ा अलग रहते. ग्रेविटी मेंटेन करना जिसको कहते हैं कि दे ऑलवेज मेंटेन दिस ग्रेविटी. तो कहते हैं कि फ्यूडलिज्म एक ऐसा फिनोमेना है कि आपकी सोसाइटी कभी भी उससे बाहर नहीं आ सकती. तो मतलब ब्रिटिश सोसाइटी कैसी है? वही सोसाइटी है. खत्म हो गई फ्यूडलिज्म, बट द एलिमेंट्स ऑफ फ्यूडलिज्म आर स्टिल देयर, दे आर स्टिल देयर. सो दैट्स व्हाई इफ देयर वाज सम रिस्ट्रिक्शन वाज देयर ओवर द पीपल, दे हार्डली बॉदर्ड फॉर दैट. वो ठीक है, चलेगा. And of course, the British society was sort of under some control of the parliament and the crown, and they're quite okay with this. But they're saying that the evolution or the grooming of American society is very different. They have just come out from the European society and they have created this culture by their own, and that's how there are certain values, okay? And in fact, they openly say that certain values were there with respect to what? With respect to basically property rights and all. अभी भी American society खुल के बोलती है ना यार. जब कोविड हुआ था तो अमेरिकन प्रेसिडेंट ने स्टेटमेंट दिया था कि हमारी इकॉनमी बनी नहीं बंद होने के लिए. पता नहीं आप लोगों को याद है या नहीं? हाँ, अमेरिकन कोविड के समय जब पूरी दुनिया की इकॉनमी बंद हो गई, अमेरिकन इकॉनमी चल रही थी और लोग उतने ही मर रहे थे, तो अमेरिकन प्रेसिडेंट ने कहा कि हमारी इकॉनमी, मैं क्या करूँ, हमारी इकॉनमी बंद होने के लिए बनी ही नहीं. मतलब लोग मरते हैं तो मरते रहे, लेकिन उनकी इकॉनमी, उनके इंडस्ट्रीज, उनकी सारी चीज़ें चलती रहनी चाहिए. तो आप सोचो कि किस तरीके की सोसाइटी है जो इसमें ये वैल्यू है, और दे ओपनली एक्सेप्टेड कि वी आर लाइक दिस ओनली, वी आर लाइक दिस ओनली. सो बेसिकली अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में वो ट्रेट्स है, वो एलिमेंट्स अभी भी जिंदा हैं. तो वो क्या कहते हैं कि अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में वो वैल्यूज है नहीं, कुछ चीज़ें हैं, और ओपनली वो एक्सेप्ट करते हैं कि अमेरिकन सोसाइटी इज ए कैपिटलिस्ट सोसाइटी, एंड देयर दे डू रेस्पेक्ट प्रॉपरली द प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स एंड एवरीथिंग, बट एट द सेम टाइम इट इज लाइक व्हेनेवर इट कम्स टू द डेमोक्रेटिक राइट्स, ठीक है, वी ऑलवेज एक्सेप्ट इट कि यस like it's a very democratic society, ठीक है, and there was no feudal element in this society, and that's how whenever Britain tried to tried to somehow make the policies more strict, they had problem with that. Why? Because they felt that they are always free. The moment they realize that there is some sort of more restriction over them, they believe that now it is an anti-authoritarian society or polity, so they refused for that, and that's how all those ideas that no taxation without representation. तो बोलते आप कैसे इग्नोर कर सकते हो, कितने बड़ा आइडिया है ये. It's a superb idea. Nobody has ever thought of thought in this line that no taxation without representation. इन्होंने सोचा क्यों, क्योंकि ये सोसाइटी बड़ी उस टाइप की थी, रेवोल्यूशनरी टाइप, बड़ी रेवोल्यूशनरी टाइप. तो बोलते ये आइडियोलॉजिकल रेवोल्यूशन है अमेरिकन सोसाइटी में. So that's how American Revolution was being presented. Got the point? Now these ideas had been even taken further also. Now when it comes to the Marxist historiography, right? So the moment it comes to the Marxist historiography, so either you say Marxist or else you say neo-left. ये सब फिर किसके आइडियाज को प्रेजेंट करेंगे आप बताइए? कंजर्वेटिव को. मार्क्सिस्ट जो है कंजर्वेटिव आइडिया को करेंगे, ऑफ कोर्स प्रोग्रेसिव आइडिया को. सो यू वोंट फाइंड मच डिफरेंसेस बिटवीन द प्रोग्रेसिव एंड देम. So mostly you'll find that the Marxist or neo-left like a school is there, and they have promoted which ideas? The progressive ideas. वो भी वही क्लास, बस उसने जो है इकोनॉमिक रीजंस की जगह उसने क्या कर दिया, इन लोगों ने किसकी बात की? क्लास की बात की. That ultimately there was class struggle in American society, and the reason behind the American War of Independence is precisely the American class struggle. Right? So if this question is being asked to you that whether American war was revolutionary or not, so what you are going to write? क्या लिखेंगे? हाँ, exactly. ये मत लिख देना कि हाँ था revolutionary. आप लिखेंगे कि it is being viewed like differently by different scholars. और ये प्रोग्रेसिव इकोनॉमिक रीजंस की बात करते हैं, वो क्लास की बात नहीं करते. वो अलग अलग सेक्शंस की बात करते हैं, बट क्लास की बात नहीं करते. द आइडियाज आर वेरी सिमिलर, पैकेजिंग इज वेरी डिफरेंट. क्योंकि जब ये शुरू हुए थे उस समय तो मार्क्स आए भी नहीं थे.
प्रोग्रेसिव क्लास की
प्रोग्रेसिव इकोनॉमिक एग्जैक्टली सेम बात कर रहे हैं. वो क्लास को यूज नहीं करते हैं. वो बोलते हैं है सोसाइटी में डिफरेंसेस हैं. मार्क्स क्या बोलते हैं? क्लासेस में डिफरेंस है. तो दोनों में फर्क है. जब आप कहते हैं कि सोसाइटी में डिफरेंसेस है तो यहाँ पे नॉन क्लास इश्यूज भी हो सकते हैं. मार्क्स प्रिसाइजली क्लास की बात करते हैं. तो आप क्या लिखेंगे कि जो है अलग अलग व्यूज है. तो अगर आप हम उन व्यूज में देखेंगे तो इट वाज रेवोल्यूशनरी. कंजर्वेटिव व्यू से देखेंगे इट वाज नॉन रेवोल्यूशनरी. ओके, सो गिव द हेडिंग अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन. American Revolution. American Revolution. American Revolution is one of the most important events. Most important events in the history of world. In the history of world. तबीयत ठीक हो गई? Most important events of the world, comma, which had greater impacts, over हटा दो, ऑन कर दो, ऑन the shaping of नहीं shaping in the shaping of greater impacts in the shaping of modern world, in the shaping of modern world, shaping of modern world. But there are several debates there are several debates for the causes of American Revolution, causes of American Revolution, comma, nature of American Revolution, and most importantly, regarding the issue that whether the American Revolution was revolutionary, comma, and if yes, how revolutionary it was. Change the paragraph and write. From the middle of 17th century to 1760s, 1763 कर लीजिए, to 1763 comma, the relationship between Britain and 13 colonies, remained cordial. But after 1763, cordial. But after 1763, a conflicting relationship between these two can be noticed. At one hand, the crown of Britain, George III, and British Prime Minister Grenville are known for increasing the degree of colonization. On the other hand, the leaders like Samuel एडम्स, कॉमा, और कौन कौन से? जेम्स ओटिस, जेम्स ओटिस, ओटिस, OTIS, ओटिस, हेनरी, पैट्रिक, पैट्रिक हेनरी, बेंजामिन फ्रैंकलिन, जॉर्ज वॉशिंगटन, थॉमस जेफरसन का रेवोल्यूशन में इतना रोल नहीं है, थॉमस जेफरसन का कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकिंग में बहुत रोल है। हाँ, तो सबसे ज़्यादा रोल किसका मानोगे? तभी तो मैंने कहा कि जो जो कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल वाला एस्पेक्ट है उसमें जेफरसन का रोल सबसे ज़्यादा माना जाता है, ठीक है। हाँ, जॉर्ज वॉशिंगटन यार वही तो लीड कर रहा है। बेंजामिन फ्रैंकलिन, लिख लो यार, खुश रहो, ऐसा कुछ नहीं। हाँ, जॉर्ज वॉशिंगटन, जॉर्ज वॉशिंगटन ऑन द अदर हैंड क्या लिखा? ऑन द अदर हैंड लीडर्स लाइक, कॉमा, प्लेड वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल एंड अदर्स कर लेना, ठीक है, और भी है, सही कह रहे लोग, ठीक है। प्लेड वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट रोल फॉर प्रिपेयरिंग द बैकग्राउंड, for preparing the background of the American Revolution. Background of American Revolution. And finally taking it to the successful point, to the successful point. To the successful point. What? आज़ादी लेके रहेंगे, ठीक है, ओके। चेंज द पैराग्राफ once again. The American Revolution is interpreted by various schools of historiography, in many different ways. Full stop. That's how a simplistic interpretation is not possible. Simplistic interpretation is not possible of American Revolution. So the causes of American Revolution, comma, and and nature of American Revolution, could be understood more in the background of the American historiography. आप पॉइंट फॉर्मेट में लिखिए इसको। जॉर्ज Bancroft explained the American Revolution as a divine or as a master plan of God. As a master plan of God, and he, along with other nationalists, he, along with other nationalists, believed that Revolution American Revolution was a very radical movement. Revolution was a very radical movement. Was a very radical movement. Change the second point. But the imperialist scholars had a different viewpoint, different viewpoint on it, since they wanted to support the restoration of the relationship, between Britain and the independent America. Independent 13 colonies कर लो, independent 13 colonies. The prominent scholars, नहीं उसी में, the prominent scholars in this school are George L. Beer, Charles M. Andrews, सब एक दूसरे की कॉपी देख रहे हैं, अपनी वाली देख लो, लिखी है थोड़ी देर पहले. Charles M. Andrews and Lawrence H. Gibson. क्या लिखा है? The prominent
scholars, George L.
prominent scholars in this group are, okay, fine, full stop. They believed that political and constitutional reasons are the political and constitutional conflicts between 13 colonies and Britain was the main reason behind the American War of Independence. At one hand, the colonies were moving towards greater self-control or self-government. The colonies were moving towards greater self-government. On the other hand, Britain was trying to exercise more strict control. On 13 colonies, which caused the conflict between the two. between the two. Next point. Okay. But the idea of imperial school was countered by the progressive school which is mainly led by the scholars like Carl L. Baker, Charles A. Beard, Charles A. Beard, Arthur M. Schlesinger, and Jamson. Arthur M. Schlesinger and Jamson. Jameson. Jamson. The progressive historians believed the economic reasons undoubtedly played very significant role. Very significant role in American War of Independence, American Revolution. Especially after 1763. The period before 1763 is called by them as the period of salutary neglect. क्या बोल रहे हो? Is called as the period of salutary neglect. Since various acts were there, such as Navigation Act, Molasses Act, but they were not rigorously followed. So the colonies never had any problem. With these acts. Change the paragraph and write. But after the war against Indians and France, after the war against Indians and France, the British government was desperate to compensate this money. Government was desperate to compensate this money. Compensate their loss कर दीजिए, not money, this money. Compensate their loss. Compensate their loss. Which brought changes, which brought changes in the British policy towards American colonies. अब यहाँ पे सब पॉइंट्स लिखिए, थोड़े पॉइंट्स में मैं कुछ डिक्टेट नहीं करा रहा हूँ, आपको मैं बता रहा हूँ बस क्या क्या लिखना है यहाँ पे। यहाँ पे आप सबसे पहले लेंगे नेविगेशन एक्ट, राइट इट डाउन, नेविगेशन एक्ट। सेकेंड पॉइंट, द चेंज्ड पॉलिसी टुवर्ड्स द वेस्टर्न लैंड, नेक्स्ट क्वार्टरिंग एक्ट, क्वार्टर जो रहने वाला क्वार्टर होता है, क्वार्टरिंग एक्ट। हाँ, तो क्वार्टर के नाम से दो चार लोग बड़े खुश हो गए, तो मैं आधा बोलता तो और ज़्यादा खुश हो जाते आप तो। क्वार्टरिंग एक्ट। नेक्स्ट,
इनके बारे में लिखना है,
वो सब आप नोट से देख लीजिएगा। हाँ ठीक है, प्रिंटेड नोट्स में है वो सारी चीज़ें दी हुई, कुछ नहीं, एक इन्फॉर्मेशन और एक लाइन उसके बारे में कि क्या कब इम्प्लीमेंट हुआ और क्या उसके अंदर मेन प्रोविजंस थे। ठीक है, क्वार्टरिंग एक्ट। नेक्स्ट, टाउनसेंड एक्ट, टाउनसेंड, TOWNSHEND, टाउनसेंड एक्ट। नेक्स्ट इज स्टैम्प एक्ट, नेक्स्ट इज शुगर एक्ट, दैट्स इट। ठीक है, अगर आपसे ये पूछा जाए हाउ फार डू यू अग्री विद द व्यू दैट द इकोनॉमिक कॉजेज वर द मेन कॉजेज बिहाइंड अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन, राइट, अगर आपसे सिर्फ ये पूछ रहे हैं कि टू व्हाट एक्सटेंट यू बिलीव दैट द इकोनॉमिक फैक्टर्स वर द मेन फैक्टर्स और द मेन कॉजेज बिहाइंड अमेरिकन रेवोल्यूशन, इन दैट केस यू नीड टू एक्सप्लेन देम प्रॉपर्ली। ठीक है, मतलब आप बताएंगे कि प्रोग्रेसिव स्कॉलर्स की बात करते हैं और ये सारे रीजंस वो लोग लिस्ट करते हैं कि ये है रीजंस, और ये भी सिर्फ रीजन नहीं है, इल टेल और इल राइट दैट हाउ कम दीज पॉलिसीज आर बिकमिंग मोर स्ट्रिक्ट। अब ये तो बाकी सब तो नए हैं, एक ही नया, एक ही पुराना है, कौन सा? नेविगेशन एक्ट। तो आप ये बताएंगे कि नेविगेशन एक्ट में कैसे स्ट्रिक्टनेस बढ़ गई है, क्या क्या जो है न्यू पॉलिसीज और द न्यू चेंजेस विच आर देयर एंड हाउ कम इट वाज मेड मोर स्ट्रिक्ट, दैट्स हाउ यू आर गोइंग टू राइट। ठीक है, वो आप खुद से लिखेंगे, इन सारे एक्ट्स के बारे में है उसमें लिखा हुआ नोट्स में, एक दो लाइन उसमें से ले लेंगे आप। ठीक है, ओके, चेंज द पैराग्राफ एंड राइट, इट्स द सेम पॉइंट, मतलब पॉइंट चेंज नहीं करना है। Apart from listing the various economic reasons for this conflict, Carl Baker has called the revolution as a dual revolution, which was fought in two different fronts, पॉइंट में लिख लीजिए इसको। फर्स्ट, who between Britain and America, is going to rule on America? Who between Britain and America is going to rule on America? Second, among the Americans, either the lower slash radical, either the lower slash radical or the elite slash merchant class is going to rule. Merchant class is going to rule. Got the point? ठीक है. Okay, इसी पैराग्राफ में कंटिन्यू करते हैं. There is no change. ठीक है. On the other hand, Charles A. Beard called the process of constitution making as a revolutionary process. Called the process of constitution making as a, sorry, not revolutionary, as an counter revolution, called the revolution as a counter revolution because American Revolution was revolutionary in nature. Because American Revolution was revolutionary in nature. Since it was a war between two sections of American society. नहीं, मैंने ये नहीं कहा. मैंने कहा कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकिंग एज रेवोल्यूशन. आप आधा सेंटेंस गोल कर दिया आपने. कंफ्यूज हो गई. Two sections of American society. War between two sections of American society. Sections of American society, along with the war against Britain. Full stop. Arthur M. Schlesinger argues that the revolution was initially in the hands of conservative then it passed on to the radical groups. Not accepted as radical groups. That's how the American Revolution was revolutionary in character. Next point, change the point. आपको इतना तो समझ में आ गया होगा कि इसमें से सेपरेटली एक क्वेश्चन बन सकता है क्योंकि इसमें कंटेंट है बनने लायक. ठीक है, बाद में. ठीक है, इसके बाद नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. During the Cold War, a new historiography appeared. हम रीजंस पे उतना नहीं जा रहे हैं क्योंकि वो आपको लिखना नहीं है. A new historiography appeared, which is known as neoconservative, led by Robert E. Brown, and Daniel J. Burstyn. Borstin. Daniel J. Borstin. Full stop. They viewed the American society as a democratic society based on consensus. Democratic society based on consensus. Consensus from the colonial times. According to them, the British policies were bringing further changes. According to them, the British policies were bringing further changes which was not acceptable to the Americans. That's how they went for the revolution. Change the point. Next point. The Afro-American movements and Afro-American movements and the increasing class struggle in American society class struggle in American society got another school known as neo-progressive. Who studied the loyalists to the British Crown and Parliament. Loyalists to the British Crown and Parliament during the course of the revolution. During the course of American Revolution. That's how American society was divided into the loyalists and the revolutionaries. Loyalists and the revolutionaries. Next point. Bernard Bailyn has given a fresh angle. Bernard Bailyn has given a fresh angle to the study of American Revolution. By calling it an ideological movement, ideological revolution, by calling it revolution. He studied the common sense under inverted commas. Common sense by Thomas Paine, and the various pamphlets various pamphlets issued by the revolutionaries during the by the during the revolution and argued that ideas had also played very important role so either it was the idea of liberty by Thomas Paine or the idea of no taxation without representation, comma, where undoubtedly shaped the American Revolution. Shaped the American Revolution. The concluding paragraph, last. The debate yet continues. Under some other schools, such as left school, neo-left school, the revisionist school, etc. But it is accepted by majority of the scholars that it is one of the landmark events in the human history. Landmark events in the human history which has played very significant role in shaping the modern world, That's it. ठीक है? So we're just done.